He tried to stand up and immediately fell back face first into the dirt. Someone laughed at him, then another and another, 3 voices, young and spiteful. He turned his head and saw 3 pairs of boots, expensive ones, with silver buckles. One of the men standing there bent down and threw something into the mud next to his face, a bow, a cheap training bow with a cracked handle. The guy said that trash belongs next to trash. The other 2 laughed again. Then they walked away. Their footsteps faded behind the stone wall of the training yard. He remained lying there, alone, in the mud, with a body that wasn't his own and a head that was buzzing. Memories flooded in all at once, someone else's memories. They were like water in his lungs. He was drowning in them. A boy named Lee Haiwon Jun, 16 years old, a third-year student at the Silver Maple Academy, branded with an F rank, the butt of jokes from day one, not a single friend, not a single ally, not a single person who had said a kind word to him in 3 years, and last night that boy climbed the North Tower and stepped off, but the body survived. The boy, however, did not. Now there was another person inside, Park Hyun-jun, 34 years old, a hunter, a sniper, a specialist in taking down large predators at ranges of 300 meters and beyond, a man who had spent 8 years in the Siberian taiga and the African savanna, who knew what a bear smelled like a second before it attacked, who could determine the direction of the wind by the way the grass bent with an accuracy of half a meter per second, and who died at the wheel on an empty highway because he hadn't slept for 3 days and closed his eyes for a second, just 1 second. That was enough. He slowly sat down. Mud dripped from his face. His hands were shaking. He looked at his palms, narrow, white, not a single callus. This boy had never held anything heavier than a textbook. Hyun-jun clenched his fists and unclenched them, clenched and unclenched. His muscles were weak. He had no grip strength. He tried to tense his forearm and felt it tremble from the effort. It was the body of a child who had never trained, not a single day, not a single hour. He looked at the bow lying in the mud. He picked it up. He turned it over in his hands. The handle was cracked. The string was loose. The limbs of the bow were warped. Even on Earth, with a weapon like this, he wouldn't have hit a target from 30 meters away. But it was a bow. And a bow was all he'd ever needed. He stood up. His legs were unsteady, but they held him up. He looked around. The training yard of the Silver Maple Academy. Stone walls 3 times a man's height. A sandy arena with wooden dummies. Racks of weapons along the eastern wall. Swords, spears, maces. Everything for close combat. Not a single decent bow. Not a single quiver of arrows for long-range shooting. This world didn't understand the concept of distance. He looked at his left shoulder. Something was glowing there beneath the dirty fabric. He pulled down his sleeve. A tattoo blazed on his shoulder, thin lines woven into the shape of an eye. The brand, that very F-rank brand that everyone considered junk, the gaze of weakness. He remembered from the boy's memories what it did. It revealed a living creature's weak spot, a small red mark on the enemy's body. Everyone said it was useless. The mark was too small. It flickered and shifts. It's impossible to hit it. An ordinary archer couldn't do it. Hyun-jun looked at the brand for a long time, intently. Then he looked at the wooden dummy 20 paces away from him. He concentrated. 1 second. Nothing lit up on the dummy's chest. Right. The dummy isn't alive. The brand only works on living things. He turned his head. A pigeon was perched on the wall of the training yard, an ordinary gray pigeon. Hyun-jun concentrated again. 1 second, and he saw it. A tiny red dot lit up on the pigeon's neck, on the right where the carotid artery runs. He knew that. He'd slaughtered pigeons in Africa when there was nothing else to eat. The dot was exactly where it should be. His hands trembled slightly, not from the cold, from realization. For 34 years, he'd been shooting blind, by anatomical atlases, by memory, by experience. He'd factored in the wind in his head. He calculated the trajectory using formulas ingrained in his muscle memory by thousands of shots, and he hit his mark. He always hit his mark, but now they were drawing the target right on the target itself, a living target that showed him exactly where to aim. This wasn't some junk brand. It was the ultimate weapon. It's just that no one in this world knew how to use it. Because no one in this world knew what ballistics was. No one calculated for wind drift. No one knew how to shoot 300 meters. The local archers were militiamen with wooden bows who shot 40 paces and were happy if they hit the torso. To them, the mark of weakness was a mockery. A tiny, flickering dot 200 meters away, an impossible target. But Hyunjun wasn't a local archer. He was a sniper. The dove flew away. The dot faded. Hyunjun lowered his head and looked at the broken bow in his hands. Then he looked at the training yard. Then at the sky. The gray sky of a foreign world. Somewhere far beyond the horizon, something low and heavy was rumbling. The rift. He knew from the boy's memories what it was. A hole in the sky from which the beasts were crawling out. Monsters ranging in size from a dog to a tower. For 300 years, they had been killing people, and people had responded with swords and magic, with brute force, with ranks, with a system in which only the power of a blow was valued, and those who couldn't strike hard enough were cast aside, like this boy. Hyunjun gripped his bow so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He knew what he had to do. First, the body. This body needed to be brought into shape, not to the level of a fighter, but to the level of an archer. An archer doesn't need huge muscles. He needs steady hands, calm breathing, a strong back, and the endurance to lie motionless for hours. He could do it. He'd done it with 18-year-old recruits at the base in Chuncheon. In 3 months, he'd turned city boys into archers capable of hitting a target from 200 meters away. Here, he had 2 months until the selection, the annual tournament in which the 20 worst students were expelled. Lee Hyunjun was first on the list to be cut. But Lee Hyunjun was no longer there. Hyunjun picked up a broken arrow from the mud. He examined the arrowhead, dull, crooked, but made of iron. He could work with this. He turned toward the mannequin, stood sideways, raised the bow. The string pulled taut with difficulty. His hands were shaking. He exhaled, slowly. There's a window between 2 heartbeats, a brief moment when the body is completely still. He'd seized that window thousands of times. He shot. The arrow flew crooked. It sailed 2 meters past the target and stuck in the sand. Hyunjun looked at his trembling hands. No strength. No stability. No muscle memory. He had to build everything from scratch. He picked up the arrow, returned to his position, shot again, missed 1 more time. Missed again. The arrow stuck into the edge of the dummy. Progress. He kept shooting until his hands went numb. Then he sat down on the ground and just breathed. The sun rose higher. The training yard began to fill with students. They walked in groups, with swords and shields, in their training uniforms, laughing and jostling. No one looked his way. To them, he was a non-entity. Trash rank, trash brand, trash man. Hyunjun watched them and thought that half of them weren't even 17 yet. Children. Playing war, unaware that real combat isn't a pretty sword swing. It's hours of waiting, dirt, cold, a single shot, and then silence. He stood up, brushed the dirt off his knees, picked up his bow, and headed for the armory. He needed decent arrows, and a decent bowstring, and a place where no one would bother him. He knew that 2 months of hell lay ahead, but he also knew that hell was his natural habitat. The Academy's armory occupied the basement of the East Wing. Hyunjun descended the stone steps and found himself in a long hall with a low ceiling. The walls were lined with weapons, swords, spears, axes, shields of all sizes, halberds, spiked maces, chain maces, all for close combat, all designed to get within arm's reach of the creatures and strike. There were 4 bows, all training bows, all in poor condition. The arrows lay in a dusty box in the corner, blunt arrowheads, crooked shafts, feathers made from goose quills glued on haphazardly. Hyunjun sorted through them all. Of the 40 arrows, 8 were more or less straight. He set those aside and picked the best of the 4 bows. The draw weight was light, the limbs were made of wood, without any reinforcement. The maximum range was 60 meters. That wouldn't be enough for the creature, but it would do for practice. The caretaker was sitting behind the weapons counter, an old man with one arm. His left sleeve was tucked in and hemmed. He looked at Hyunjun indifferently and asked what he wanted. Hyunjun said he wanted to take a bow and some arrows for practice. The old man snorted and replied that no one had taken any bows for 3 years. "You can take them all, if you want." Hyunjun thanked him and asked if there was a place at the academy for long-distance range. The old man looked at him as if he were crazy. "How far is long range?" Hyunjun said. 200 meters to start with." The old man laughed, good-naturedly but loudly. He said that even the best archers in the Royal Guard could only shoot 80 paces, and that 200 meters was nonsense. Then he fell silent and looked at Hyunjun more closely, a flicker of something resembling interest. He said there was an old quarry beyond the northern wall. Stone had once been quarried there for construction. Now it was abandoned. It was about 300 meters to the far wall of the quarry. Hyunjun nodded. That was just what he needed. He left the armory with a bow and 8 arrows. He climbed the stairs and ran into 3 guys, those same ones, silver buckles on their boots. The one standing in front was a big guy, a head taller than Hyunjun, broad shoulders, a 2-handed sword on his back, a B-rank mark glowed on his neck. Standing next to him were 2 smaller men, one with a spear, the other with daggers at his belt. The big guy saw the bow in Hyunjun's hands and smirked. He said that the scum had picked up his stick again. Then he asked if Hyunjun was planning to shoot at sparrows. The 2 beside him laughed. Hyunjun looked at the big guy. He activated the brand. A second of concentration, a red dot lit up on the left side of the guy's chest. Above his heart, slightly offset to the left of center, the intercostal space between the 4th and 5th ribs. Hyunjun knew what that meant. 1 arrow to that spot and the heart would stop. Not immediately, in about 15 seconds, but it would stop. He gave nothing away. He simply walked past them in silence. The big guy shouted after him that during the selection he'd personally make sure Hyunjun was the first to be eliminated. Hyunjun didn't turn around. He walked toward the north wall. He already had a training plan in mind. First week, the body. Running every morning. Push-ups until failure. Planks to stabilize the core. Pull-ups to strengthen the latissimus dorsi. The back and shoulders are the foundation of an archer. Without them, it's impossible to hold the bow's draw for more than 3 seconds. Second week, shooting. Start at 20 meters. Work up to 40. Then 60. Work on the anchor point. This is the spot on the face where the archer brings the bowstring before the shot. Every archer has their own. The corner of the jaw, the tip of the nose, the cheekbone. You need to find your own in this new body. Week 3. Increase the distance. Find materials for a proper bow. This training junk won't last more than 60 meters. You need a composite bow, wood, horn, and sinew. 3 layers. The wood provides flex. The horn provides compression from the inside. The tendons provide tension from the outside. A bow like this shoots 3 times farther than a wooden one of the same size. On Earth, nomads invented it 3,000 years ago. No one here has heard of it. Week 4. Ballistics. Teaching the body to automatically account for the wind. On Earth, this would take half a year. But he has the brand. The mark shows where to aim. The body just needs to remember how to deliver the arrow to that spot in different wind conditions. This will cut the training time in half. He reached the northern wall. Beyond it was indeed a quarry, a wide one, deep, with sheer walls of gray stone. Murky water pooled at the bottom. The far wall was a long way off. He estimated the distance by eye, 280 meters. Maybe 300. Perfect. He descended an old stone staircase carved into the quarry wall. It was quiet at the bottom. The wind swept between the walls, but its direction was predictable from left to right. He could use that to his advantage. Hyunjun found a flat spot. He drove a stick into the ground. He tied a strip of fabric torn from his sleeve to it. A wind vane, the simplest kind. Back on Earth, he'd used anemometers and laser rangefinders. Here, he'd have to make do with his hands. He stepped back 20 meters from the stone wall. He set up a target, a rock the size of his head, placed on a ledge. He raised his bow. The first shot went a meter to the left. Wind. He looked at the flag. The fabric was deflecting by about 20 degrees. The wind was roughly 2 meters per second. The correction at 20 meters was minimal, so the problem wasn't the wind. The problem was his hands. They were shaking. His forearm muscles were cramping from the tension. He couldn't hold the bow drawn for more than 2 seconds. On Earth, he could hold a rifle for minutes. Here, 2 seconds was the limit. He shot, again and again. 8 arrows. He went to retrieve them. He returned. Another 8 shots. Out of 16 shots, 0 hits. They all missed the rock. His hands were burning. His fingers were bleeding from the bowstring. He didn't have an archer's glove. He didn't have a finger guard. The bowstring cut into his skin with every shot. He tore off another strip from his shirt and wrapped it around his fingers. He continued. By noon, he had fired about 80 shots. He hit the rock 4 times, out of 80. 5%. On Earth, he would have been kicked out of boot camp, but on Earth, he had a trained body and proper weapons. Here, he had the hands of a child and a stick with a string. He sat down on the ground. His fingers were bleeding through the rags. His back ached. His shoulders burned. He looked at his hands and thought that in a month they would be different. In a month, they'd have calluses. In a month, they'd stop trembling. He knew this for sure because he knew the body. Any body can be reshaped if you know what you're doing and don't go easy on yourself. He'd stopped feeling sorry for himself when he was about 20. He got up, gathered his arrows, climbed out of the quarry, and on the top step of the ladder, he saw a girl. She was standing there with a book in her hands, looking down at him. Not very tall, dark hair tied back in a ponytail, an academy uniform, a medical department badge on her lapel. She asked what he was doing in the quarry. Hyun-jun said he was training. She looked at his hands, at the blood seeping through the rags. Her eyes widened slightly. She said he needed to go to the infirmary. Hyun-jun said he was fine. He'd just scraped his skin. She shook her head. She stepped forward. She took his hand without asking for permission. Her fingers glowed with a soft green light. The pain vanished. The skin closed up. The bleeding stopped. 10 seconds later, his fingers looked as if he hadn't been shot at all. Hyun-jun looked at her. She said her name was So Yuna. She was a C-rank healer, assigned to the 3rd year. She said she'd seen him in the quarry 2 hours ago on her way to the library, and she'd decided to come back to check on him. Hyun-jun asked why. Yuna paused. Then she said that the last time she hadn't checked on someone, that person had died. She let go of his hand. She turned and walked towards the academy. Hyun-jun stood there, watching her go. A healer, C-rank. That meant serious power, tissue regeneration, stopping bleeding, possibly bone fusion. In a sniper squad, the medic is the second most important person after the spotter. He remembered her name, So Yoon. The next morning, he got up before dawn. He climbed out of the dormitory through a first-floor window. He ran 3 laps around the academy. Each lap was about 600 meters. After the first lap, he threw up. After the second, he fell to his knees and just breathed for a minute. He walked the 3rd lap, then push-ups. He managed 11. On the 12th, his arms gave out. Plank. 30 seconds, and he collapsed. On Earth, he could hold a plank for 4 minutes. Here, 30 seconds. He lay on the cold ground and looked up at the sky, the gray sky of Ireland. Somewhere in the distance there was a rumble. We were this time. From all Boy's memories, he knew that 3 border kingdoms had already fallen, that the academy was preparing an emergency graduating class, that the children would be sent into battle 2 years early. He got to his feet. He went to the quarry. He shot until lunchtime, 120 shots, 12 hits on the stone from 20 meters, 10%, progress. After lunch, he went to the library. He needed information about materials for bows, about adhesives, about tendons, about horn. The library was enormous, 3 floors, thousands of volumes. He found the section on crafts. He found a book on bow construction. He opened it, he read it, and he closed it. The book described only one type of bow, a wooden one. A week passed. His body was changing slowly, but it was changing. He ran every morning until dawn. By the 7th day he could run 3 laps around the academy without throwing up. His push-ups had reached 25. His plank lasted a minute and a half. He added an exercise he wouldn't find in any textbook in this world, holding a drawn bow. You pull the string back, you hold it, count the seconds, don't shoot, just hold it. On the first day, he held it for 3 seconds. By the end of the week, 9. The goal was 30. On Earth, a sniper must hold his breath and maintain his position for at least 30 seconds. Here, the principle is the same. Accuracy comes from stillness. In the quarry, he shot for 5 hours a day. He moved the target back 40 meters. His hit rate dropped to 4%. Then it started to rise. By the end of the week, he was hitting a rock the size of his head from 40 meters 3 times out of 10, 30%. At 20 meters, it was already 6 out of 10. His fingers were covered in calluses. The bowstring no longer cut into his skin. Yuna came every evening. Without asking, she'd just show up at the edge of the quarry. She'd sit on a rock, take out a book, wait. When he finished, she'd silently tend to his hands. She repaired the micro tears in his shoulder and back muscles. She reduced the inflammation in his joints. He didn't ask. She didn't ask. On the 3rd day, he asked why she was doing this. Yuna was silent for a long time. Then she said that her older brother had been a hunter, B rank, a swordsman. He'd died on a mission 2 years ago. A breached creature had severed his femoral artery. Yuna was in the rear. 100 meters away, she ran toward him, but with a femoral artery injury, you have 3 minutes. It took her 4 to get there. He died in her arms. Ever since then, Yuna hasn't left the wounded side. She hasn't taken her eyes off them. She hasn't been late. Hyunjun listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said one thing. He said the problem wasn't that she ran slowly. The problem was that she'd been stationed 100 meters away instead of 20. A healer shouldn't be in the rear. A healer should be where the wound will be even before it appears. Yuna looked at him strangely. She asked how it was possible to know where a wound would be before it appeared. Hyunjun said it was possible if you watched how a fighter moved. If you know which hand is his dominant one, if you understand which blow he'll miss because of his habit of turning his head to the left instead of to the right. The body signals an impending injury a minute before it happens. You just have to know how to read it. Yuna was silent. Then she took one of her journals out of her bag. She opened a blank page and began to write. Hyunjun watched her and thought that this girl would be the best field medic the world had ever seen if she survived long enough to learn. On the 10th day, something happened that changed everything. In the morning, the academy director stepped out onto the parade ground, a short man in his 60s with a silver beard and a monocle in his right eye. His name was Kwon Tai-ho. An S-rank awakened, an old-school swordsman. He stood on the steps of the main building and spoke in an even voice. 2 weeks ago, a steel boar emerged from the rift north of the academy. A B-class creature, a mutant with armor made of metal plates covering its entire body. 3 academy professors went out to intercept it. 1 was killed, 2 were seriously injured. The creature was driven into an old stone quarry to the north, the very same quarry where Hyunjun used to train. His heart skipped a beat. The principal continued. Reinforcements from the capital would arrive in 10 days. Until then, the quarry was off limits. Any student found near the quarry will be immediately expelled. The roll call ended. The students dispersed. Hyunjun stood there, lost in thought. The steel boar, Class B, metal armor covering its entire body. 3 professors were unable to finish it off. 1 of them died. Reinforcements in 10 days. 10 days during which the creature will be holed up in the quarry, in his quarry. He went to the library. He found a description of steel boars. armored subspecies of creatures, weight ranging from 600 to 800 kilograms, height at the withers up to 1.5 meters. Their armor consists of bone plates covered with a metallic coating. It's impossible to pierce with standard weapons. Only A-rank magic or higher, or an SS-class physical blow, no weak points. Hyunjun read the last line and smirked. No weak points. According to people who didn't have the mark of the gaze of weakness. But he did, and he knew for certain that every living creature has a weak point, because every living creature has a brain, and the brain is inside the skull, and the skull has openings, eyes, nostrils, ears, a mouth. Hyunjun closed the book. He stood up. He walked toward the principal's office. The secretary tried to stop him. Hyunjun said he had a proposal regarding the steel boar. The secretary looked at him, at his third-year uniform, at his F-rank badge, and said the principal was busy. Hyunjun said he'd wait. He waited 4 hours. He sat on a bench in the hallway, without moving, without complaining. 4 hours of stillness is just a warm-up for a sniper. The principal came out of his office in the evening. He saw him. He frowned. He asked who he was and what he wanted. Hyunjun stood up. He introduced himself. He said his name was Lee Hyunjun, a third-year student, branded with the gaze of weakness, F rank. The principal nodded. He knew that name. The boy on the expulsion list. Hyunjun said he could kill the steel boar with a single shot. The principal looked at him for a long time. Then he took off his monocle and wiped it. Then he put it back on. He asked if the boy had hit his head. Hyunjun said no. His mark reveals the weak spots of living beings. The steel boar is a living being. It has a weak spot, and Hyunjun can hit it. He needs one shot, just one. The director was silent. He wasn't laughing. Hyunjun expected laughter, but there was none. The director was an old warrior. He had seen many strange things in his life. He asked from what distance. Hyunjun spent 2 days preparing, not on shooting, on reconnaissance. He spent the first day on the ridge of the quarry. He lay down on the rocks 50 meters from the edge. He took out a homemade spyglass, 2 glass lenses from broken lab equipment inserted into a wooden tube. The quality was terrible, but good enough to make out the bottom of the quarry. The steel boar was down there. He saw it, and his first thought was that the book hadn't lied. The beast was enormous, nearly 700 kilograms, taller at the withers than a man, covered entirely in armor, head, neck, back, flanks, legs up to the knees. Metal plates lay layered one on top of the other like scales, dark gray, matte, not a single gap. The creature stood by a puddle at the bottom of the quarry and drank water. Hyunjun activated the brand. 1 second, a red dot lit up. The boar's left eye. The dot was tiny, 3 centimeters at most, and it wasn't on the eye itself. It was behind the eye, 3 centimeters from the surface of the eye socket, a direct path to the brain through the eye socket. Hyunjun lay there and calculated the distance to the bottom of the quarry from the ridge, approximately 240 meters as the crow flies, taking the elevation difference into account. The angle of descent is about 35 degrees downward. When shooting at a downward angle, you need to account for gravity. The arrow will travel farther than it would in a horizontal shot at the same distance. The formula is simple. The horizontal distance equals the slant distance multiplied by the cosine of the angle. 240 times the cosine of 35 is approximately 197 meters. That means the drop correction needs to be calculated for 200 meters, not 240. He jotted this down on a scrap of paper. Then there was the wind. He tied 4 strips of fabric to sticks stuck along the ridge, every 20 meters. The wind was blowing from the northwest, about 3 to 4 meters per second, with gusts up to 6. The gusts were a problem. A steady wind can be compensated for. Gusts cannot. He had to wait for a window, the moment when the wind died down between gusts. He timed it. The gusts came at intervals of 12 to 15 seconds. The window of calm lasted 3 to 4 seconds. 3 seconds. In 3 seconds, he had to aim and shoot. Back on Earth, he could do it in a second and a half. But on Earth, he had a sniper rifle with a bipod. Here, he had a wooden bow that he held with his hands that were shaking. He lay on the ridge until evening, watching the wild boar. He took notes. The boar drank water 3 times, in the morning, at noon, and at sunset. Each time, it approached the puddle at the exact same spot from the east and turned its left side toward the northern wall of the quarry. Its left eye was turned upward, toward the ridge, toward Hyunjun's position. It was perfect. He spent the second day preparing his equipment. Out of 8 arrows, he chose the best one, the straightest shaft, the sharpest tip. He reworked the fletching. He removed the goose feathers. He found some hawk feathers in the woods behind the academy. Hawk feathers are stiffer and more stable. He trimmed them to the same length. He glued them on with fish glue from the kitchen. 3 feathers at equal distances, 120 degrees between each. He sharpened the arrowhead on a stone. 2 hours, until it was razor sharp. A wild boar's eye socket isn't bone, it's soft tissue and fluid. The arrow doesn't need to pierce armor. It needs to enter the eye and travel 7 to 8 centimeters to the brain. The arrowhead must be narrow and sharp, like a needle. He filed down the side edges. He made the arrowhead longer and narrower, then the bow. He tightened the bowstring. He found a piece of tendon from some animal in the workshop. He twisted it and replaced the old bowstring. The new one was stiffer. The draw weight increased. The range of the shot increased, maybe up to 80 meters. That wasn't enough. 240 meters is 3 times as far, but he had a trump card, shooting downwards from a height. The elevation difference provides additional energy. Gravity accelerates the arrow on its downward trajectory. Plus, he wasn't shooting at armor. He was aiming for the eye. The arrow didn't need to pierce anything. It just had to fly there and strike its target. He ran a test calculation. The arrow's velocity upon leaving the bow is approximately 40 meters per second. The flight time to the bottom of the quarry along a ballistic trajectory is approximately 8 seconds. In 8 seconds, the arrow will lose velocity due to air resistance, but would gain speed due to gravity when fired downward. The final velocity upon impact would be approximately 35 meters per second, enough to pierce the eyeball and penetrate the brain, if the tip is sharp enough, if the arrow flies straight, if the wind doesn't blow it off course. A lot of ifs. But Hyunjun was used to this. Every long-range sniper shot involves a set of conditions: wind, humidity, temperature, altitude, the Earth's rotation. The planet's rotation isn't factored into the calculations here, but there's magic. He didn't know how magic affected the arrow's flight. He didn't know if there was an equivalent to the Coriolis force here. He worked with what he had. Morning of the 3rd day. Dawn. Hyunjun arrived at the quarry an hour before the appointed time. The director was already waiting at the crest. Kwon Taiho stood in full battle gear, a long sword hung from his belt. Shoulder guards made of dark metal. His face was calm. Standing next to him were 2 professors. One had burns on his hands. The other wore a head bandage, the 2 who had survived the first encounter with the wild boar. The director looked at Hyunjun, at his dirty uniform, at the wooden bow, at the single arrow in his hand, just one. Hyunjun had brought only 1 arrow. The principal asked where the rest were. Hyunjun said that if he needed more than 1, it meant he'd already missed, and if he'd missed, a second one wouldn't help. The principal was silent for a second. Then he nodded almost imperceptibly. He said that was the boy's position. Hyunjun lay down on the ridge in the spot he'd chosen 2 days earlier. The rock beneath him was cold. He set up his bow. He checked the bowstring. He checked the arrow. The arrowhead glinted in the dawn light, sharp as a needle. The wind. He looked at the wind vanes. All 4 hung almost motionless. A morning lull. The best time to shoot. The wind would pick up in an hour. He had a window of opportunity. He waited. The boar lay at the bottom of the quarry, asleep, a massive carcass curled up against the eastern wall. Its armor plates rose and fell with every breath. Hyunjun waited. Patience is a skill, the most important skill for a sniper. Not shooting, not accuracy. Patience, the ability to lie there for hours and wait for that single moment when all the conditions align. The director stood behind him, silently. Two professors sat a short distance away. The sun was rising. The boar slept. Hyunjun lay there. An hour passed. The boar stirred. It stood up, it stretched, and it walked toward the puddle. Just like yesterday, just like the day before yesterday, the eastern side, its left side facing the north wall, its left eye looking up. Hyunjun slowly drew his bow. His body trembled instinctively. But less than a week ago, calluses on his fingers held the bowstring. His back tensed evenly, his shoulders worked as a single mechanism. He activated the brand. A second, a red dot lit. The boar's left eye. 3 centimeters. At a distance of 240 meters, the dot flickered and shifted slightly as the beast moved its head. The boar leaned toward the water. Its head froze. The dot froze. The wind died down. The flags hung still. 3 seconds. 2 heartbeats. A moment's pause between them. An exhale. His fingers released the bowstring. The bowstring snapped. The arrow flew. He didn't see its flight. He saw only the red dot. He saw how it glowed steadily and motionless. Then the dot went out. The arrow entered the steel boar's left eye. It passed through the eyeball, through the optic nerve, through 7 centimeters of soft tissue, and entered the brain. The boar didn't scream. He didn't flinch. His legs simply buckled. 700 kilograms of armored flesh collapsed into the mud next to a puddle, a splash of water, and silence. Hyunjun lay on the ridge. The bow was still trembling in his hands. Behind him there was absolute silence. He turned his head. The director was standing there with a monocle in his hand, not on his eye, but in his hand. He had dropped it. The 2 professors stood with their mouths agape. The director slowly picked up the monocle, put it on, and looked down at the bottom of the quarry. Then at Hyunjun. He said that the boy had just killed a Class B Tverian with a bow, with a single shot, from a distance that no archer on the continent could cover. Hyunjun stood up. He brushed the dust off his knees. He hid the bow behind his back. He looked the principal in the eye, and said he had a proposal. The principal listened. Hyunjun said that in 2 months the selection would take place. 20 students would be expelled, the weakest, the most useless, those with trash-tier marks and low ranks, those whom no one wanted. He said he wanted those 20, every single one of them. The principal asked why. Hyunjun said he would turn them into a squad, a combat squad, not swordsmen, not mages, archers, snipers, people who kill from a distance the beasts can't reach. The principal was silent for a long time. The wind began to pick up. The flags on the poles fluttered. Somewhere far beyond the horizon, the rift hummed. The director said it was madness. Then he looked at the dead boar at the bottom of the quarry, then back at Hyunjun, and he said he'd give him a chance. The news spread throughout the academy in half a day. Lee Hyunjun, a trashy F rank, a guy on the expulsion list. He killed the steel boar with a single arrow. By lunchtime, all 400 students knew about it. By evening, the professors were debating it. The story was getting embellished with details. Some said he shot from 500 meters. Others said the boar was SS class. Still others claimed the principal had helped him with magic. Almost no one knew the truth. But everyone knew one thing. A trash-rank student had killed what 3 professors couldn't. The reaction was mixed. Some students looked at Hyunjun with curiosity, others with distrust. But there was a group that looked at him with hatred. Hyunjun knew it would be this way. In any hierarchy, there are those at the top, and when someone from below suddenly rises, those at the top feel threatened, not rationally, but instinctively. The first blow came on the 2nd day after the hunt. Hyunjun returned to his dorm room and discovered that his bow was broken, not just cracked, broken in half. Someone had come in while he was in class and snapped it over their knee. His arrows lay nearby, all 8 of them. The arrowheads had been knocked off, the fletching was torn off. Hyunjun stood in the doorway and looked at the debris. Then he picked them up. He left the room. He went down to the workshop. He sat down at the workbench and began making a new bow. From scratch, there was a girl in the workshop. She was sitting at a table in the back, assembling some kind of mechanism, tiny parts, gears, and springs. Her fingers moved with impossible precision, every movement calibrated to the millimeter. Hyunjun looked at her hands and paused. He'd seen hands like that only once in his life, those of a master gunsmith in Seoul who assembled custom sniper rifles, hands that feel the material. The girl looked up, blonde hair, gray eyes. Her features weren't local, the northern continent. She looked at the broken pieces of the bow in his hands and asked what had happened. Hyunjun said that someone had broken his bow. She looked at the fragments more closely. She ran her finger along the fracture line. She said the wood was rotten. This bow would have broken on its own in a week, even without anyone's help. Then she asked why he needed a bow. Hyunjun said he was an archer. She raised an eyebrow. She said she'd heard the story about the wild boar, and she asked if it was true. Hyunjun said it was true. She was silent for a moment. Then she held out her hand and introduced herself. Hana Walker, 18 years old, senior. Exchange student from the northern continent, the steel fingers mark. C rank. She said it evenly and calmly, but Hyunjun heard the familiar bitterness in her voice. Steel fingers. Fine motor skills honed to a supernatural level. Everyone said she could only do embroidery. Hyunjun looked at her hands, at the mechanism she was assembling, at the gears the size of a pinky fingernail, and he said one sentence. He said he needed a weaponsmith. Hana froze. Hyunjun sat down beside her and began to explain. He explained what a composite bow was. 3 layers, wood in the center, horn on the inside, tendon on the outside. Each layer functions in its own way. Together they create a weapon that shoots 3 times farther and is twice as powerful as a standard wooden bow of the same size. Hana listened. Her expression changed from polite curiosity to professional focus. She began asking questions. What kind of glue? What kind of sinew? What kind of horn? How to dry it? How to bend it? Hyunjun answered. He knew everything. He had seen how composite bows were made in Mongolia during a business trip. He had spoken with the master craftsman. He had held bows in his hands that were 300 years old and still shot. Hana took out a piece of paper. She began to draw. Her fingers moved quickly. The drawing of the bow appeared on the paper with a precision that Hyunjun had only ever seen in engineering software on a computer. She said she needed a week. The materials were in the workshop: mountain goat horn, a bull's tendon, glue made from fish bladders. All of these were used for other things, but no one had ever thought to combine them into a single weapon. Hyunjun nodded. Then he asked why she was helping him. Hana looked him straight in the eye. She said that in her 2 years at the academy, not a single person had ever asked her to create something, only to repair, to embroider, to hem. Her hands were used as tools for trivial tasks. No one had ever once suggested she make a weapon. Hyunjun understood. He held out his hand to her. She shook it. Her grip was firm. Her fingers were slender but strong. They worked late into the night. Hana drew up blueprints. Hyunjun explained the principles. By morning, they had a plan for the first composite bow in Ireland's history. The next day, Hyunjun began assembling a squad. The director kept his word. He handed Hyunjun a list of 20 students slated for expulsion after the selection. 20 names. 20 marked ones deemed useless. 20 teenagers whom the world had written off as trash. Hyunjun read the list, and he smiled. Not because the list was a good one, because he saw potential where others saw nothing. The quiet step mark, D-rank camouflage, the ability to move silently. The locals considered it useless because combat is about noise, but reconnaissance is about silence. And a sniper needs someone who can get him to his position unnoticed. The keen hearing mark, E rank, enhanced hearing. The locals considered this a curse because, in battle, the roar would deafen the bearer. But at a sniper position in silence, a person with such hearing would hear an enemy approaching from half a kilometer away. Mark, light feet, F rank, reduces body weight by 1/3. The locals laughed, saying it was for ballerinas, but for a sniper who lies for hours on a thin roof or a fragile ledge, it's the difference between life and a fall. 20 marks, 20 abilities, each useless in head-on combat, each indispensable in the Iper doctrine, which didn't exist in this world. Hyunjun began visiting them one by one. The first was Kim Da-hee. He found her behind the stable. She was sitting on an upside-down bucket, sharpening a knife, small, thin. Her dark hair was cut short. Her eyes were angry. There was a fresh scrape on her cheek. Someone had hit her again. She saw Hyunjun and immediately bristled. She asked what he wanted. Hyunjun said he'd come to offer her a job. She snorted. She said there were no jobs for her anywhere. In 2 months, she'd be kicked out of the academy, and then she'd be sold into servitude because she was good for nothing else. Hyunjun sat down on the ground next to her. He looked at the knife in her hands, at the way she was holding it. Her grip was correct, blade pointing away from her, thumb on the heel. This girl hadn't just sharpened the knife. She knew how to use it. He asked if she knew what a scout was. She said no. He explained, "A scout is the eyes of the unit, the person who goes ahead of everyone else, finds the way, checks for danger, leads the fighters to their positions, and leaves as quietly as he came. A scout doesn't need strength. He needs speed, silence, the ability to see what others don't notice. And for a scout, the silent step mark isn't a D rank. It's an absolute advantage." Da-hee listened. The knife in her hands stopped moving. She looked at Hyunjun, and something was changing in her eyes. Not trust, not yet. But something resembling interest. She asked why she should believe him. Hyunjun said there was no need. He said that in 2 months she'd be kicked out, and in 2 months she could be standing behind the stables, sharpening a knife, or she could be standing in formation with the squad that had just killed the beast. The choice was hers. Da-hee was silent, then she stood up. She sheathed the knife on her belt. She said she'd come for training, but if this turned out to be just another joke, she'd personally stab him in the leg with that knife. Hyunjun nodded and moved on to the next name on the list. In 2 days, he'd gone through all 20. 14 agreed, 6 refused. Of those who refused, 3 didn't believe him. 2 were afraid. 1 said he didn't care. Hyunjun didn't press the issue. He knew you couldn't force someone to want to live. You could only show them what it was worth living for. 14 wasn't enough. He needed all 20, but 14 was a start. The first training session was the next morning, the quarry dawn. 14 students stood in a semicircle before him, frightened, angry, confused. The youngest was 14. The oldest was 17. Children, broken children with trash-like marks and empty eyes. Hyunjun stood before them and silently thought that he had seen eyes like that before, in the eyes of recruits at training camp, in the eyes of children in African villages after raids, in the eyes of young hunters after their first failure, the eyes of people who had been told they were worthless. He spoke. He said he wouldn't lie, that it would be hard, that he didn't know if they would succeed. But he knew one thing for sure. Their marks weren't useless. Their marks were simply not suited for the kind of battle they'd been trained for. A swordsman doesn't need silent step, but a sniper needs it like the air he breathes. A mage doesn't need keen hearing, but for a sentry it will save his life. A knight doesn't need light feet, but a sniper on the roof can't do without them. They weren't taught what they're good at. They were taught what they're weak at. And then they were punished for being weak. It's not their fault. It's a flaw in the system. 14 pairs of eyes were watching him. Not everyone believed him. Some stood with their arms crossed in skeptical expressions. But everyone listened. Hyunjun said they'd start with something simple. Running, push-ups, stretching, no shooting for the first week. The body comes first. A murmur went through the group. One guy asked why a shooter needed to run. Hyun-jun replied that a shooter who couldn't run a kilometer wouldn't make it to his position. A dead shooter doesn't fire any shots. They started running. After 200 meters, half of them stopped, gasping for breath. After 400 meters, only 4 were still standing. Hyun-jun ran alongside them. His body was weak, but he ran, because a commander who doesn't run with his men isn't a commander. He looked at these kids and thought that in 6 months they would be different. In 6 months their names would be known. In 6 months the word trash would no longer stick to them, or they would all die. There was no third option. The first week of training was hell. Not for Hyun-jun, for them. 14 trainees arrived at the quarry every morning before dawn, running, push-ups, planks, squats, stretching, running again. Half of them had never run for more than a minute in their lives. Their bodies were weak and flabby. Their muscles were atrophied. They were out of breath after just 200 meters. Hyun-jun didn't yell. He didn't insult them. He didn't punish them. He just ran alongside them. When someone fell, he'd stop and wait. He didn't help them up. He waited until they got up on their own. Then he kept running. On the third day, one of the students gave up. A guy named John Minho. Brand, warm palms. F rank. The ability to slightly warm his hands. Everyone considered it useless. Minho lay down on the ground after the first lap and said he couldn't go on. That he didn't see the point. That they'd expel him anyway. Hyun-jun sat down next to him. The other 13 stood and watched. Hyun-jun asked Minho if he knew what happened to a bowstring in the cold. Minho said no. Hyun-jun explained that in the cold, the bowstring loses its elasticity. It becomes stiff. The bow loses half its power. An archer in winter combat is as good as dead if his bowstring is frozen. But if there's someone nearby who can warm the bowstring with their hands 3 seconds before the shot, the archer becomes a threat again. Minho lay there in silence. Then he sat up. Then he stood up. Then he ran. By the end of the first week, 12 remained out of 14. 2 left without a word. They didn't say goodbye. They just stopped coming. Hyun-jun didn't go after them. He knew you couldn't drag along those who didn't want to go. Energy spent on persuasion is energy stolen from those who remain. 12. That's enough for now. Yuna came every evening. She treated everyone, not just Hyun-jun. Sore feet, sprained ligaments, calluses, bruises. She worked silently and methodically, moving from one person to the next. The green light from her hands touched each one. Hyun-jun watched her and saw how she assessed them. Her eyes moved over the patient's body. She memorized how each person moved, who limped on their left leg, who had a weak right shoulder, who was short of breath due to an old rib injury. She began to take notes. 3 journals turned into 4. The 4th was dedicated to the squad. Name, brand, physical condition, weaknesses, injuries, movement patterns. Hyun-jun looked through this journal on the 5th day and said it was the best medical chart he'd ever seen. Yuna blushed and hid the journal behind her back, but Hyun-jun could tell she was pleased. For the first time, someone had evaluated her work not as treatment but as a system. In the 2nd week, he gave them bows. Hana finished her first composite bow in 8 days instead of the promised 7. She brought it to the quarry that morning. Hyun-jun took the bow in his hands and froze. It was beautiful, not in a decorative sense, but in an engineering sense. The curve of the limbs was perfect. The horn on the inside was sanded smooth. The sinew on the outside was stretched in even layers. The grip was wrapped in leather. The bow was a third shorter than usual, but Hyun-jun knew it would shoot twice as far. He drew the bowstring. The resistance was strong, 1.5 times greater than that of a training bow. His hands trembled but held firm. 2 weeks of training were paying off. He shot. The arrow flew with a different sound, not the dull click of a wooden bow, but a sharp, cracking snap. The arrow embedded itself in the stone wall of the quarry 100 meters away. It sank deep, 3 fingers width, into the stone. 12 students stood with their mouths agape. Hana stood with her arms crossed and a slight smile. Hyun-jun turned to her and said that this was the best bow he'd ever held in both of his lives. Hana looked away, but he noticed that the tips of her ears had turned red. He asked her, "Make 12 more." She said there were enough materials for 6, the rest would have to wait. They needed a horn, they needed tendons, they needed a special glue. Hyun-jun nodded. 6 to start with. He'd distribute them to the best archers in the unit. The rest would practice with training arrows. Archery training began. Hyun-jun lined them up. 20 meters to the target, rocks on the wall's ledges. He demonstrated the basic stance, feet shoulder-width apart, left foot slightly forward, torso perpendicular to the target, bow in the left hand, string in the right, 3 fingers, index finger over the arrow, middle and ring fingers beneath it, anchor point at the corner of the jaw. Exhale, shoot. He demonstrated it once. The arrow hit a rock. They gave it a try. Out of 12 shots, 0 hits. The arrows flew in all directions. 1 shot went straight up. Hyun-jun wasn't surprised. He'd expected this. Archery isn't an intuitive skill. The body resists. The muscles work incorrectly. The eyes focus on the wrong thing. The brain tries to aim as if throwing a stone rather than shooting an arrow. You have to relearn everything. From scratch. He approached each of them in turn. He stood behind them. He placed his hands on their shoulders. He corrected their stance. Each one was different. Minho's shoulders were too high. He was tensing up out of fear. Hyun-jun told him to lower his shoulders and imagine he was standing on the bank of a river rather than at the archery range. For the girl named Ri-Soo-ah, who bore the light feet mark, had the opposite problem. She was too relaxed. Her body was wobbling. The arrow veered to the right because her torso twisted upon release. Hyun-jun showed her how to stabilize her hips. Everyone has their own problem. Everyone has their own solution. A weapon isn't made for general use, but for a specific hand. A stance isn't prepared in a generic way, but for a specific wind. A student doesn't learn how to shoot. They learn how to overcome what's holding them back specifically. By the end of the second week, 3 out of 12 were hitting the stone from 20 meters away. Consistently. 5 out of 10. 50%. For 2 weeks of training, starting from scratch, that was good. Very good. Da-hee didn't shoot. Hyun-jun wouldn't let her use the bow. Instead, he trained her separately. Every morning, an hour before the group training, running in silence, crawling over rocks, camouflage. He taught her to move so that even he couldn't hear her. Da-hee was gifted, her silent step. Mark didn't just muffle the sound of her footsteps, it extended to her entire body. Her clothes didn't rustle, the rocks didn't creak under her feet, twigs didn't snap. She moved like a shadow. Hyun-jun had seen people like this in Africa, trackers from tribes that had grown up in the forest, but they'd trained their whole lives. For Da-hee, the mark and 3 days of training were enough. By the end of the second week, she had crept up to within 2 meters of him, and he hadn't noticed. He was sitting on a rock, cleaning his bow. She appeared out of nowhere. She stood behind him with a knife in her hand. She wasn't threatening him, she was testing him. Hyun-jun sensed a shift in the air a second before she touched his shoulder. He grabbed her hand and spun around. Their faces were just 10 centimeters apart. Da-hee pulled her hand away. She took a step back. Her cheeks flushed. She said she was checking to see if the disguise would work on him. Hyun-jun said it almost worked, and that's very good. Da-hee muttered something indistinct and walked away, but he noticed she was smiling slightly. Toward the end of the second week, an unexpected problem arose. Professor Yoon De-soo, the ancient SEALs instructor, gray-haired, kind, with a gentle smile and a soft voice. He came to see Hyun-jun after the evening training session. He stood at the edge of the quarry and looked down at the students gathering arrows. Hyun-jun walked up to him. Professor Yoon said he'd heard about his initiative, that he was impressed, that young people need leaders like him, that he wanted to help. He offered his services as a mentor, as an advocate before the Academy Council, and as someone who had spent many years protecting weaker students from expulsion. His voice was warm, his eyes were kind. Hyunjun listened and nodded, and he felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. 34 years in the field had taught him one thing. When a beast bares its teeth, it's a threat. When a beast smiles, it's a trap. Professor Yoon was smiling. Hyunjun Jun thanked him. He said he appreciated the offer, that he'd think about it. Professor Yoon nodded. He patted him on the shoulder. On the left shoulder, where the brand was. The touch lasted a second, maybe a second and a half. Then the professor left. Hyunjun stood on the ridge and watched him go. He didn't know why, but the touch on the brand felt wrong, as if something inside him had flinched and then gone still again, as if someone had checked the lock on the door. He remembered that feeling, and he remembered the name, Yoon Dae-soo. The next day, he found another name on the list of students to be expelled, one he'd missed earlier. Emily Carter, 15 years old. Mark, calculator. B rank, instant calculations. Hyunjun reread the description 3 times. B rank. A B rank student was on the expulsion list. He went to look for her. He found her in the accounting office, a windowless basement room. Seated at a desk piled high with ledgers was a petite girl with red hair and freckles. She was tallying columns of numbers. Quickly, her pen flew across the paper, page after page. Hyunjun walked in and stood by the door. Emily looked up. She looked at him. She smiled. She said she knew who he was, the guy who killed the wild boar. The whole academy is talking about it. Hyunjun said he'd come for her. Emily blinked. She asked why. Hyunjun asked why a B-rank student. Rank student was sitting in the accounting office counting other people's money. Emily stopped smiling. She said that counter wasn't a combat brand. It doesn't shoot. It doesn't cut. It doesn't heal. It just counts. That's why she was assigned to the accounting office. A useful resource. Hyunjun sat down in the chair across from her. He asked if she knew what a ballistic calculator was. She said no. He explained. On Earth, there's a device that calculates adjustments for a shooter in real time. Distance, wind, angle, temperature, humidity, projectile spin. The device performs the calculation and gives the shooter the point of aim. The shooter doesn't have to think. He simply aims the weapon where the calculator tells him to, and he hits the target. On Earth, electronics do this. Here, there are no electronics, but there's a girl who calculates faster than any computer. Emily listened with her mouth agape. Hyunjun said he needed a spotter, someone who calculates real-time adjustments for the entire squad. 12 shooters, 12 different positions, 12 different distances, 12 different angles, and one person who keeps it all in her head and tells everyone where to aim. Emily's eyes grew huge. She said she could do it, that she definitely could, that this was exactly what she was made for. Hyunjun stood up. He held out his hand. Emily jumped up from her chair. She grabbed his hand with both of hers. She shook it so hard that his shoulder ached. She said she'd come tomorrow. No, today. No, right now, Hyunjun said training was in the morning, in the quarry, until dawn. Emily nodded so quickly that her red hair flew in all directions. He walked out of the accounting office and thought he'd just found the most dangerous weapon in the world. Not a bow, not a sword, not magic. The mind of a 15-year-old girl who thinks faster than an arrow flies. 1 month, 30 days since he woke up. Hyunjun stood on the ridge of the quarry and looked down at his squad. 13 people, including Emily. They were shooting, in unison. On command, 6 archers with Haina's compound bows stood in position along the quarry's eastern wall. The other 6, with training bows, stood closer to the targets. Emily sat on a rock between them, a notebook in her hands, counting. Out loud, quickly. She'd call out a name, then a number, then a direction. Min-ho, 2 fingers to the left. Su-ah, 1 finger higher. Jong-woo, hold. The archers listened and adjusted their aim. Then they shot. Out of 6 shots at 80 meters, 4 hit a rock the size of a fist. 67%. A month ago, these kids couldn't even hit a wall. Hyunjun didn't smile, but inside, something warm spread through his chest. He knew that feeling. He felt it every time a recruit fired their first accurate shot, an instructor's pride, quiet and deep. Emily turned out to be a genius, not just quick with calculations. She literally saw numbers. When she looked at an arrow in flight, she saw its trajectory as a line of numbers, angle, speed, deviation. She calculated the adjustment before the arrow even reached the target, and by the next shot she was already correcting the archer's aim. On the first day, she got confused. She'd her corrections too late. The archer was already releasing the bowstring when she shouted the number. By the third day, she had learned to give the correction before the shot. By the seventh day, she was guiding 3 archers at once. By the end of the month, 6. Hyunjun told her that on Earth there were people who were called living computers. They could multiply 6-digit numbers in their heads in a matter of seconds, but none of them could do what she was doing, because none of them had done it in real combat, where lives depended on their calculations. Emily listened, her eyes shining. She asked what a computer was. Hyunjun laughed for the first time in a month. Alongside the marksmanship training, Hyunjun worked with Da-hee on the scouting program. Every evening after the main training session, they would head into the woods behind the academy. Hyunjun taught her to read tracks, not with magic, with her eyes. A broken branch at knee height. That meant a large animal had passed by. The direction of the break indicates the direction of movement. The depth of the track indicates weight. The distance between tracks indicates speed. The moisture in the ground where the track was made indicates the time. Da-hee absorbed everything like a sponge. Her mark helped. Silent Step allowed her to sneak up on animals within arm's reach. She watched them. She memorized how they moved, how they reacted to sounds, how they behaved before an attack. Hyunjun added one more element, marking. He taught her to leave inconspicuous marks on trees and rocks, notches, scratches, and tied strings. Each mark meant something: direction, distance to the target, type of danger, number of enemies. This way, a scout could lead an entire squad along a route without saying a word. Da-hee mastered the system in 5 days. On the 6th day, she suggested her own modification, using resin instead of string. It darkens an hour after being applied. This means the color of the resin can indicate when the mark was left. Hyunjun looked at her and thought that if this girl were on Earth, she would be the best tracker in any army in the world. On the 30th day, what he had both been waiting for and dreading happened. The selection, the Academy's annual tournament. The 20 worst students would be expelled based on their results. The format was simple: 3 days. The first day, individual trials. The second day, group trials. The third day, overall rankings and the announcement of results. The individual trials consisted of 3 parts: striking power, speed, magic accuracy. All 3 categories were tailored for swordsmen and mages. There was no category for archers, because there were no archers in this world. Hyunjun gathered his squad the evening before the selection. 13 people sat around a campfire in the quarry. Their faces were tense. Their hands clutched mugs of hot tea. They were afraid. Every single one of them. Hyunjun said they would fail the individual trials, all of them, without exception. Silence. Someone dropped a mug. Hyunjun continued. He said they were last in striking power, second to last in speed. As for magical accuracy, most of them had none at all. Based on their individual results, each of them would end up in the bottom 20. Their faces turned ashen. Minho hung his head. Sua bit her lip. Da-hee gripped the knife at her belt so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Hyunjun raised his hand. He said that the individual trials were on the first day. The second day consists of group trials, and during the group trials they'll show something this academy hasn't seen in 300 years. He explained the plan. The group trial on the second day is a hunt. Each group is tasked with eliminating a pack of beasts in a controlled zone north of the academy. The zone is fenced off by magical barriers. Beasts of various classes have been released inside. Groups consist of 10 people. They will be evaluated on the speed of the sweep and their casualties. Yunjun said they wouldn't be going as a group of 10. He asked the director to field the entire squad as a single team, 13 people. The director agreed on the condition that they be assigned a zone with enhanced creatures. Since there are more of them, the mission must be more difficult. Yunjun agreed. He told the squad that there would be wolf creatures in the zone. A pack, 15 to 20 individuals, all D-class, fast, coordinated. They hunt in packs. They attack from multiple sides simultaneously. For a swordsman, a single wolf creature is an easy target. A pack of 20 is a death sentence. But for a sniper squad with a spotter and a scout, a pack is a set of targets moving along predictable trajectories. He spread the plan out on the ground. He drew a map of the area with a stick. He pointed out the positions: 6 shooters on the high ground, 3 pairs. Each pair covers a 120-degree sector. Together, they cover a full circle. Emily is in the central position with a view of all 6. She's calling in the fire. Dahi is in the lead. She goes first. She finds the flock. She marks their positions. She returns and reports the direction and number. Min-ho is with each archer. His job is to keep the bowstring taut between shots. Yuna is in the center with Emily. She's ready to run to any wounded person. The other 4 are in reserve with training bows. Their job is to finish off any wounded enemies who break through the first line. Hyunjun himself will be in the rear position. The highest point, the longest range, he'll take out the pack leader. The squad listened. Their eyes shifted. The fear hadn't gone away. But something else had been added to that fear: understanding. For the first time in their lives, they saw a plan in which each of them was needed, not as cannon fodder, as a specific element of the system, with their own place, with their own role, with their own name. The first day of the selection went exactly as Hyunjun had predicted. Individual trials, striking power. His squad took the last 13 places, speed, the last 13 places, magic accuracy, the bottom 13 spots. The spectators laughed. Students from noble families pointed fingers. One of them, that big guy with the two-handed sword, whose name was Kang Sojin, shouted that trash is still trash. Hyunjun stood in silence, hands behind his back. His face was impassive. He looked at Kang Sojin and thought that this boy was 20 years old. Back on Earth, at 20, Hyunjun had already killed his first bear. 1. All by himself, in the taiga, with a single bullet. Because a bear doesn't give you time for a second shot, and this boy stands there with a sword behind his back, laughing at the children because that's how he was taught, because the system told him that he's on top and they're at the bottom. Hyunjun wasn't angry. He'd grown tired of people like that back in his first life. That evening, the squad sat in the quarry, silently, dejected. The shame of the first day weighed heavily on them. Hyunjun sat down among them. He said one sentence. He said that tomorrow they would show these kids what real hunting is, and that real hunting isn't a swing of a sword. It's silence, patience, and a single precise shot. The second day of selection, morning, fog, the controlled zone north of the academy. Hyunjun stood before his 13 recruits and checked their gear. 6 compound bows, 4 training bows, arrows, 20 for each archer, 200 arrows in total. That would be more than enough for 20 beast wolves if every third shot hit the target. But Hyunjun wasn't counting on every third shot. He was counting on every second one. A month of training had brought his hit rate to 50% at 80 meters. At 40 meters, the rate was 70%. At 20 meters, it was nearly 90%. The beast wolves were fast but predictable. They attacked in a straight line, just like real wolves. An ambush from the bushes, a sprint, a leap, a bite. 4 to 5 seconds pass between the moment a wolf emerges from cover and the moment it reaches its prey. 4 seconds is 2 shots. If the shooter is ready, if the spotter has given the correction, if the scout has warned them in advance. Hyunjun looked at his squad. Pale faces, clenched jaws, trembling hands. Fear, real fear. Not the kind from training, This was their first real battle, against real monsters that could kill them. He could have given a speech, could have motivated them, inspired them, but he didn't. Instead, he approached each one by one, and said one sentence to each of them. Minho. Keep your bowstring taut and breathe steadily. Sutsu'a. You're the lightest of them all. Take up a position on that tree, it'll hold. Jongwoo. You're the most accurate shooter at 40 meters. Take up a position on the eastern flank. It's 40 meters from there to the clearing. He called each one by name. He gave each one a specific task, not a general one, a specific one, tailored to each person, to their strengths, to their weaknesses. When he finished, 13 pairs of eyes were looking at him differently. The fear hadn't gone away, but something else had appeared in their eyes. Trust. They entered the zone. Dahi went first. She vanished into the fog so quietly that even Hyun-jun didn't hear her footsteps. The silent step mark turned her into a ghost. The squad waited. 1 minute, 2, 5. Emily sat on a rock, nervously fidgeting with her fingers. Yuna stood next to a bag of bandages and ointments. A green light was already glowing in her palms. Ready. 10 minutes. Dahi returned just as silently as she'd left. She emerged from the fog 3 steps away from Hyun-jun. She reported. A pack. 18 of them. In a clearing 400 meters to the northwest. They're lying down, resting. The leader is in the center, large, twice the size of the others. Bushes and trees surround the clearing. 3 approaches from the south, a cliff to the north. Hyun-jun nodded. Perfect. He gestured to indicate their positions. The squad moved out, quietly, slowly. They'd been training in silent movement for 2 weeks. It wasn't perfect. Twigs snapped, rocks creaked. But the wind was blowing from south to north, from them toward the wolves. The sounds were carried back. It took 20 minutes to take up their positions. 6 shooters at 3 points, 2 pairs, the eastern flank and the western flank. Hyun-jun was alone on the central hill. The hill was about 200 meters from the clearing. Emily was next to him, lying on her stomach, with a book pressed against the ground. She had already calculated the distance to the clearing and the wind direction, angle, separately for each shooter. Hyun-jun activated the brand. 18 red dots lit up on the wolves' bodies below. Throat, belly, armpit, groin. Each beast had its own spot, where the armor of coarse fur was thinnest, where major blood vessels ran. He began assigning targets. In a whisper, they had no radios. Instead of radios, Hyun-jun used the simplest system, bird calls. Each shooter knew 2 signals. One meant ready, the other meant target assigned. The number of repetitions indicated the target's number. 3 calls meant the third wolf on the left. Primitive. But it worked. He gave the first signal. A jay's call. Ready? Responses came from both sides of the clearing. Quiet, brief. 6 archers were ready. Hyun-jun took aim at the pack leader. 200 meters. Haina's compound bow. An arrow with a needlepoint tip. Wind at 2 meters per second from the right. Half-body adjustments to the left. Emily whispered a number. He shifted his aim slightly. The dot glowed on the alpha's throat. Red, bright, 3 centimeters. It flickered because the beast was breathing. As it exhaled, the dot froze for a fraction of a second. The opening. He gave the second signal. 2 quick cries of a thrush. Fire. 6 bowstrings snapped simultaneously, not perfectly in unison, with a half-second difference, but close enough. 6 arrows soared into the air. Hyun-jun fired a second after them. His arrow was the 7th. It flew farther, 200 meters, a 4-second flight. During those 4 seconds, his students' 6 arrows reached their targets. 4 hit, 2 misses, 4 wolves fell. The pack sprang into action. Chaos. The remaining 14 wolves scattered across the clearing. The alpha raised his head and howled. At that moment, Hyun-jun's arrow pierced his throat, right in the bullseye. The alpha let out a rasping cry. Blood gushed from its mouth. It took 2 steps and collapsed. The pack lost its alpha within the first 5 seconds of the battle. 14 wolves without a leader. They didn't run. Beast wolves don't run. They attack. The pack turned and charged toward the nearest archers. The eastern flank, Chong-woo and his partner, Yun-jun, shouted, one word, a second volley, 6 arrows again, 3 hits out of 6. 3 wolves fell, 11 remained. The wolves were fast. They covered the distance from the clearing to the trees in seconds. The third volley wasn't enough, 2 hits. 9 wolves broke through the line of fire and darted into the trees. Yun-jun heard the screams. Sua, up in a tree, fired downwards, hit, 8. Jong-woo, on the ground, rolled behind a rock. A wolf flew over him. Jong-woo shot it in the side from 2 meters away. Hit, 7. 4 from the reserve joined the fight. Training bows at close range, 10 to 15 meters, 3 hits, 4 wolves remained. They circled among the trees, swift shadows in the fog. Yun-jun fired from the hill, 200 meters through the trees. First miss, second miss. The wolves were on the move, darting between the trunks. The reticle flickered and faded as the beast hid behind a tree. It reappeared, flickering, fading. Third shot, hit, 3. Emily was counting. She was shouting out names and numbers. Minho was reloading. Yuna ran toward Jong-woo, who had received a scratch on his forearm from a claw, not deep, but blood was flowing. 2 wolves lunged at Yuna. She was exposed, unarmed, unprotected. Hyun-jun fired, 220 meters, through the branches. The arrow passed between 2 tree trunks, a gap just wide enough for a palm, and pierced the wolf's eye. The animal rolled across the ground and came to a halt a meter away from Yuna. She didn't take her eyes off Jong-woo's wound. Her hands didn't waver. The green light burned steadily. She didn't even look at the dead wolf. The last wolf. He was small, young, fast. He darted between the trees, and not a single shooter could catch him. Dahi stepped out of the shadows, silently. The wolf didn't notice her. She didn't use her knife. She simply stood in its path. The wolf leaped. Dahi stepped aside. The wolf flew past her and landed right in Cheon-woo's line of fire, an arrow from 10 meters away, to the side. The last wolf fell. Silence. Fog. The smell of blood and wet fur. 18 dead beast wolves. Not a single casualty in the squad. Just 1 scratch on Jong-woo. Healed in 30 seconds. Duration of the operation from the first to the last shot, 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Yun-jun came down from the hill. He walked in silence. His legs trembled slightly, not from fatigue, but from the rush of adrenaline. He'd forgotten what it felt like when the battle ended and the tension left his body. He approached the squad. They were standing among the dead wolves, dirty, sweaty, with trembling hands, and with a new fire burning in their eyes. They'd done it. 13 trash-rank warriors had wiped out a pack of beast wolves in 4 minutes, without a single casualty, without swords, without fire magic, with arrows from a distance, like hunters. Observers stood at the edge of the zone. Director Kwon Tae-ho, several professors, and a group of students from other squads who had already completed their assignments. They watched in silence. The director didn't drop his monocle this time. He simply stood with his hands behind his back and nodded almost imperceptibly. Professor Yoon Dae-soo stood next to him, smiling, that same gentle, warm smile. But Hyun-jun noticed his eyes. They weren't smiling, they were assessing. The third day of the selection, the results, the Academy's auditorium, 400 students, professors, the principal on stage. Standing next to him were 3 members of the Academy's council, elderly men in dark robes with gold embroidery. They had come from the capital specifically for the selection. The principal read out the results. He started with the best, Kang So-jin, first place in the individual trials. Striking power, speed, magic accuracy. First place in everything. The hall applauded. Kang So-jin stood in the front row, accepting the ovation. Broad shoulders, a 2-handed sword on his back, the face of a winner. The director moved on to the group trials. 12 squads participated in the hunt, best clearance time and minimal casualties. He started with last place, the 12th squad, 8 minutes and 40 seconds. 2 serious injuries. The 11th squad, 7 minutes. 1 serious injury. 10th, ninth, 8th, names and numbers. Hyunjun stood in the back rows with his squad, 13 men, silent, waiting. The director reached 3rd place, 5 minutes and 20 seconds, 0 casualties. The hall erupted in approving murmurs. 2nd place, 4 minutes and 50 seconds, 0 casualties. The squad under the command of Park Seon, a beautiful girl with long black hair, stood up and bowed briefly. The heiress of a family of SS rank swordsmen, the entire hall knew that 1st place would be hers. The director fell silent. He looked at the sheet of paper in his hands. Then he looked out at the hall. 1st place, 4 minutes and 12 seconds, 0 casualties, against a reinforced swarm of 18 targets instead of the standard 12. The squad under the command of Lee Hyunjun. Silence. Absolute silence. 400 people and not a single sound. Then whispers, then a murmur, then shouts. Someone asked if this was that very F rank. Someone said it was a mistake. Someone laughed. Someone didn't laugh. Hyunjun didn't move. His squad stood nearby. Minho was breathing heavily. Sua was biting her lip. Emily was smiling so widely it looked like her face was about to crack. Da-hee stood with her arms crossed, staring straight ahead. Yuna was writing something in her journal. Even now. The director raised his hand. The hall fell silent. He said the results had been verified 3 times. The time had been confirmed by observers. 18 targets destroyed, 0 casualties, 1 minor injury treated in the field. Lee Hyunjun's squad took 1st place in the selections group trials. Then he moved on to the overall rankings, individual plus group, the calculation formula, weights, coefficients, mathematics that decided their fates. In the individual trials, Hyunjun's entire squad was in the bottom 20 spots for elimination. 13 of them were occupied by his people. But the group trials provided a bonus. 1st place in the group trials raised each participant 30 positions in the overall ranking. 30 positions. That was enough to pull 10 out of 13 out of the elimination zone. 10, not 13. 3 remained in the bottom 20. Minho. His individual score was the worst in the academy. The 30-position boost wasn't enough. Ri-Sua. Her score in striking power was 0. She couldn't even lift the test sword. Jong-woo, his speed was the slowest. He was limping on his left leg due to an old injury that Yuna could only treat superficially. 3 of his people remained on the elimination list. Hyunjun stared at the results board. 3 names in the red zone. 3 people who, an hour ago, had helped him destroy 18 wolf beasts. Minho was warming the bowstring. Without him, the bow loses half its power in the cold. Sua was shooting down from a tree. Her shot killed a wolf that was closing in on Jong-woo. Jong-woo fired his final shot at the last wolf from 10 meters away. He didn't miss, and now they were being expelled because they couldn't lift the heavy sword. Hyunjun stood up. He walked toward the stage. The hall buzzed with noise. He paid no attention. He approached the director. 400 pairs of eyes were watching him. He said he wanted to address the council. The director looked at him, then at the council members. One of the elders nodded. Hyunjun turned to face the hall. He said that 3 of his people were on the list for expulsion. He said that these 3 had just helped destroy 18 beasts in 4 minutes. He said that the selection system evaluates the power of a sword strike and running speed. But it doesn't evaluate shooting accuracy. It doesn't evaluate teamwork. It doesn't evaluate the ability to complete a mission without casualties. He said that if the academy expelled these 3, it would be expelling 3 fighters who had proven their worth in real combat, not in training, but in a battle against 18 beasts. The hall fell silent. One of the council members leaned forward. An old man with a long white beard and sharp eyes. He asked what Hyunjun was proposing. Hyunjun said he was proposing to change the formula, to add a category for long-range combat. Marksmanship, teamwork, tactical thinking. The old man shook his head. He said that the selection formula hadn't changed in 120 years, that it was approved by royal decree, that a single F rank could not change rules that stood above him. Hyunjun nodded. He had expected this. He said he wasn't asking to change the formula. He was asking to be granted the right to take these 3 into his squad as trainees, without student status, without a stipend, without dormitory housing. Just the right to train and go on missions. If, after 3 months, they failed to prove their worth, he would personally escort them to the gates. Silence. The director looked at Hyun-jun, then at the council. The bearded old man exchanged glances with the other 2. They whispered among themselves for a minute. Then the old man said this was unprecedented, but the results of the group trials were unprecedented as well. He said the council agreed. 3 months, trainees, no status, results in 3 months. Hyun-jun bowed. He returned to his group. Minho stood there with red eyes. Soo-ah covered her face with her hands. Jong-woo stared at the floor. Hyun-jun stood before them. He said they weren't going anywhere, that they would stay, that in 3 months their names would be in the top half of the list, not in the red zone. Minho raised his head. He wiped his eyes. He nodded. After the results were announced, the hall began to empty. Hyun-jun was walking toward the exit when Park So-yeon blocked his path. The heiress of a family of swordsmen, 2nd place in the group competition, with a time of 4 minutes and 50 seconds, 38 seconds slower than his squad. She was tall, almost as tall as he was, black hair down to her waist, straight back, cold eyes. The mark on her neck glowed with a bright silver light, SS, rank. She looked down on him, not because she was taller, because she was used to looking down on everyone. She said she'd seen his squad in the zone, that she'd been watching through binoculars, that she didn't understand how it worked, that the arrows shouldn't fly that far, that a wooden bow couldn't pierce the hide of a wolf beast from 100 meters away, that it was impossible. Hyun-jun said the bow wasn't made of wood. She frowned. She asked what kind it was. Hyun-jun said it was a composite bow. She asked what that meant. Hyun-jun said it meant the world was bigger than she'd been told. She stood there looking at him. He saw something familiar in her eyes. Not anger, not contempt. Confusion. The confusion of someone who had been the best their whole life and suddenly discovered that best doesn't mean only. She turned and walked away. Hyun-jun watched her go and thought that this girl would come to him in a month, maybe in 2. But she'll come, because loneliness at the top is no less painful than loneliness at the bottom. That evening, the squad sat around a campfire in the quarry. 14 people, including Yuna and Hana. Not 13, 14, because Yuna and Hana were part of the squad. Hana didn't shoot, but without her bows, there wouldn't have been a single hit at 100 meters. Yuna didn't shoot, but without her hands, Jong-woo would have bled to death. Hyun-jun stood up. He took some wooden badges out of his bag. He'd carved them the night before. Little figures of bows, rough, a bit crooked. His hands weren't those of a master craftsman, but each badge was carved individually. Each one was slightly different from the others. He began handing them out. He called out a name and said one phrase, Min-ho, for never letting a single bowstring go cold in battle. Jong-woo, for that last shot from 10 meters when his hands were shaking, but he still hit the mark. Soo-ah, for climbing a tree with a sore back and not missing a shot. Emily, for having 6 voices in her head at once and not making a single mistake. Dahi, for luring the last wolf into range without using a knife, even though she could have killed it herself. Yuna, for not flinching when the wolf fell a meter away from her. Hana, for the 6 arrows that changed the rules of the game. He named each one 14 names, 14 phrases, 14 badges. When he finished, it was quiet by the campfire. Min-ho clutched his badge with both hands and couldn't lift his head. Soo-ah cried silently. Emily pressed her badge to her chest and smiled. Dahi looked at her badge and her lips trembled. Yuna was writing something in her diary. Her handwriting was uneven. Hana twirled the badge between her fingers and smoked her pipe. The smoke rose upward and dissolved into the night sky. None of them were used to it. None of them had ever heard their name spoken with gratitude. For some, it was the first time, for others, the only time. Hyun-jun sat down by the campfire. He picked up a mug of tea. It was hot, bitter. It tasted like coffee if you closed your eyes and really believed it. He looked at these children and thought that, for this moment alone, it had been worth dying on that empty highway and waking up in the filth of a foreign world. After the selection, everything changed. Not right away. Gradually, like water wearing away a stone. First, attitudes changed, not toward everyone, toward the squad. Students who hadn't noticed them before were now looking at them. Some with curiosity, some with envy, some with respect. But they were looking. That was new. 14 people who had previously been treated like furniture suddenly became visible. Minho said that for the first time in 3 years, someone had addressed him by name instead of his brand number. Su-ah said that a girl from the next room had asked her if it was true that they had killed 18 wolves. When Su-ah said it was true, the girl asked her to teach her how to shoot. Small things, but for people who were used to being invisible, even the smallest detail was a big deal. Hyun-jun wouldn't let the squad slack off. The day after the selection, training resumed. Tougher, more intense. The shooting range had increased to 120 meters. At this distance, Hana's compound bow still worked, but the training bows no longer did. The arrows from the training bows lost their momentum at 80 meters and fell. That meant they needed more compound bows. Hana worked every day, 12 hours a day. Her fingers never grew tired. The Steel Fingers brand prevented them from tiring, but her back ached. Her eyes turned red from the detailed work. Yuna treated her back every evening. Hyun-jun brought her tea to the workshop. The three of them sat there in silence. Hana smoked her pipe. Yuna wrote in her diary. Hyun-jun cleaned the arrowheads. It was a silence without awkwardness, the silence of people who work together and don't need words to feel close. Hana finished 4 more bows in 2 weeks. 10 in all, for 13 archers. Hyun-jun decided that 10 would be enough. The 3 from the reserve would use training bows at short ranges. Their task was to finish off targets, not long-range accuracy, test shots at point-blank range. The training bow is sufficient for that. A week after the selection, So-yeon arrived, just as he had predicted. She appeared at the edge of the quarry in the morning. She stood there, looking down at the training session. Hyun-jun noticed her but didn't let on. She stood there for an hour. Then she left. The next day, she came back, and again she stood there, and again she left. On the 3rd day, Hyun-jun went up to her. He asked if she wanted to come down. So-yeon looked at him. Cold eyes, straight back. The perfect posture of an heiress. She said she had a question. Hyun-jun nodded. She asked why his unit hadn't lost a single man. Hyun-jun asked what she meant. So-yeon said that, formally speaking, her unit hadn't lost anyone either. 0 casualties on paper. But in reality, 2 of her fighters had sustained injuries that Yuna hadn't treated because Yuna was with Hyun-jun's squad. Her fighters were treated in the infirmary after the battle. One of them was bedridden for 3 days, and she thought about those 3 days every night. Hyun-jun listened. Then he asked how many people were in her squad. She said 10. He asked how many she knew by name before the selection. So-yeon fell silent. Then she said 4. Hyun-jun nodded. He said that was the difference. He said his archers didn't shoot at targets. They shot so that the person on their left and the person on their right would return alive. When you know the name of the person standing next to you, it's harder to miss, not physically, morally. So-yeon stood there looking at him. Something in her expression had changed. Her armor had cracked. Just a little. But noticeably. She asked if she could train with his squad, not as a marksman, as a swordsman, to defend their positions. Covering the snipers, Hyun-jun thought. An SS-rank swordsman in a sniper squad. That's not just defense, it's an impenetrable shield. If a creature breaks through the line of fire and reaches the snipers at their positions, someone is needed to meet it with a sword, and not just meet it, stop it. So-yeon could stop anything. He said yes, but on one condition: she trains as part of the squad, not as a guest star, not as the heiress of a noble house, as a fighter. She runs with everyone else. She does push-ups with everyone else. She listens to Emily when she gives orders. She follows tactics instead of acting on her own. So-yeon pressed her lips together. This was unusual for her, to obey anyone but her family. But she nodded. She went down to the quarry. She took her place in formation, and when Hyunjun told them to run, she ran, faster than anyone else. But she ran along with everyone else. 3 days later, she was already sleeping in Hana's workshop because she didn't want to go back to her empty senior dorm room. Hana gave her a blanket and didn't ask a single question. The group was growing, 15 people, including So-yeon. Rumors of the sniper doctrine had spread beyond the academy's walls. Hyunjun didn't know this until one morning when the director summoned him. In the office, besides the director, sat a man Hyunjun had never seen before. A man in his 40s, military uniform, a stern face, a scar running from his left ear to his chin. On his shoulder was a brand that glowed a bright red, A rank. The director introduced him, Captain Ryu Taegon, commander of the Haewon garrison, a border town, the closest to the fault line. Captain Ryu stared at Hyunjun in silence for a long time. Then he said he'd heard about the steel bore, and about the selection, and about the bow that shoots 200 meters. He said Haewon was losing people every month. Monsters were pouring out of the rifts in waves. The garrison had been cut in half over the past year. Swordsmen were dying because they got too close. Mages were burning out because they expend all their energy on a single attack. He needs something new, something that will allow him to kill from a distance and save lives. He looked at Hyunjun and said he wanted to order 50 composite bows for his garrison and an instructor to train his soldiers. Hyunjun sat there thinking. 50 bows. Hana makes one bow every 2 days. 50 bows would take 100 days, 3 months. There would be enough materials if he ordered the horn and tendons from the city, an instructor. He'd have to send someone to Haewon, one of his own men. He looked at the captain and said the bows would be ready, but he wouldn't send an instructor. He would come himself, along with his unit, in 3 months, when his trainees passed their recertification. Captain Ryu nodded. They shook hands. After the meeting, Hyunjun walked down the hallway, lost in thought. Haewon, a border town, the fault line. Real combat, an uncontrolled zone with creatures on the loose, real fault lines from which who knows what is crawling out. In 3 months, his squad would go there. In 3 months, the children would become soldiers, or maybe not. At that moment he felt it again, a tingling in his left shoulder, where the brand was, a slight one, as if someone had run a finger across his skin. He stopped. He looked around. The hallway was empty. No one was there. The tingling stopped. He stood in the empty hallway thinking about Professor Yoon, about his touch on his shoulder, about his smile that didn't reach his eyes, and about the strange feeling that there was something else inside his mark, something locked away, like a door that had been locked from the outside and the key thrown away. He didn't know what was behind the door, but he knew that someone really didn't want him to find out. 3 months after the selection, the squad had changed, not just in numbers, in essence. 15 people who, 3 months ago, couldn't run a single lap around the academy were now running 5 laps every morning without stopping. Shooting at 150 meters yielded a 60% hit rate. At 100 meters, 80%. At 59-15. Emily was coaching 10 archers at once. She sat at her post and calculated adjustments for each one faster than they could draw their bows. Dahi had become a shadow. She could walk through a camp of 20 people and no one would notice her. Hana was producing 2 bows every 3 days. 22 composite bows were ready. Each one was sighted in. Each was customized for a specific archer. So-yeon trained with the squad every day. She ran, she did push-ups, she held planks. For an SSE, the archer's physical training was just a warm-up, but she didn't complain. She didn't act superior. She simply stood in formation next to Min Ho and did the same as everyone else. Hyunjun noticed how her expression was changing. During the first week, it was stony, a mask, the perfect heiress, devoid of any emotion. By the end of the first month, the mask began to crack. She laughed when Emily dropped her notebook into a puddle and dove headfirst after it. A quiet laugh, brief but genuine. By the end of the second month, she was laughing every day. By the end of the third month, she was sitting by the campfire with the others, telling them how, as a child, she'd been forced to sleep with a sword because the blade should be an extension of the hand, and you don't put an extension of the hand on a shelf. Everyone laughed. So did she. Then she fell silent and said it hadn't been funny when she was 6. Yuna placed a hand on her shoulder. So-yeon didn't pull away. That was progress. Meanwhile, Hyunjun was dealing with what wouldn't leave him alone. The brand, the mark, the tingling in his shoulder was becoming more frequent. Every time he activated the gaze of weakness, the points glowed slightly brighter than they had a week ago. The range had increased, not by much, 320 meters instead of 300, but it had increased nonetheless. Something was changing inside him. The seal was weakening. Or perhaps he was growing stronger. He didn't know. He went to the library. He looked for information about seals. He found a little. Seals were placed on marks for various reasons: to limit power, to prevent activation, or to conceal one's true rank. The last one caught his attention: hiding one's true rank. The book explained that some branded, upon awakening, display a rank lower than their true one if a suppression seal is placed on them. The seal doesn't destroy the power. It hides it, like a cork in a bottle, and the higher the true rank, the more powerful the seal needs to be. To hide an SS rank under the guise of an F, a seal is needed that can only be placed by a master of ancient seals. Hyunjun closed the book. A master of ancient seals, Professor Yoon Dae-soo, the ancient seals instructor at Silver Maple Academy. He sat in the library, lost in thought. Yoon Dae-soo, a kind old man who always protected the weaker students, who had saved Lee Hyun-jun from expulsion for many years, who had offered his help to the squad, and who had touched his mark, causing something inside him to stir. Why hide an SS rank under the guise of an F? Why turn the most powerful reconnaissance mark into a worthless gaze of weakness? Why keep the boy at the academy and protect him from expulsion if his mark is worthless? There was only one answer: control. Someone wanted the mark to remain sealed, and that someone kept the boy close by to monitor the seal. And when the boy decided to leave, when the boy climbed the North Tower, that someone didn't stop him. Or perhaps they stopped him in their own way. Hyunjun recalled Lee Hyunjun's memories. That last night, the tower, the cold, the darkness. The boy was standing at the edge, and just before he took a step, he saw a shadow behind him. Someone was standing in the doorway. The boy didn't turn around, but the shadow was there. He was pushed, or allowed to fall. Hyunjun clenched his fists. He didn't know what he was feeling. Anger. Cold, calculated anger. Not for himself, for the boy he had never known but whose body he now inhabited, for the child who had been broken and discarded. He decided he would find the truth, but not now. Right now, he had another task. Hae-won. The evaluation of the 3 trainees took place the following week. Min-ho, Soo-ah, Jong-woo. All 3 posted results that lifted them from the bottom 20 to the top half of the rankings, not based on individual metrics, but on a new category the director had added after the selection: long-range combat accuracy, teamwork, tactical thinking. The formula wasn't changed, they just added to it. 3 new columns in the ranking table, for the first time in 120 years. The council gritted their teeth, but the selection results spoke for themselves. 4 minutes and 12 seconds, 0 casualties. You can't argue with those numbers. The trainees became students, full status, scholarship, housing. When Min-ho got the key to his dorm room back, he stood in the hallway, clutching it with both hands. 5 minutes without moving. Hyunjun walked past and said nothing. Some moments don't require words. A week later, the squad set out for Haiwan, 15 people. 22 composite bows in their cases, 300 arrows, medicines in Yuna's bag, Emily's notebooks, Dahi's knives, Hana's pipe, Zhou Yuan's sword. They walked for 3 days, along the trail through the forest. The closer they got to the border, the more frequently they came across the creatures' tracks. Broken trees, uprooted earth, claw marks on the tree trunks. Dahi read the tracks and reported. A pack of beasts had passed through here 2 days ago, heading southeast, about 30 in number. Presumed Class C. Hyun-jun nodded and adjusted their route. They bypassed the dangerous areas, not out of cowardice, out of caution. Fighting without prepared positions wasn't their tactic. A sniper in an open field is a dead sniper. A sniper in a prepared position spells death for anything that moves in his sector. On the second day of their journey, they heard a scream. Distant. Human. Hyun-jun raised his hand. The squad stopped. Dahi went ahead. She returned 10 minutes later. A caravan. 4 wagons. Merchants. They'd been attacked by a beast. One. A large one. Bear-like, but with 6 paws and a bony crest on its back. Class C. The caravan was fighting back, 2 guards with swords. One was already wounded. Hyun-jun assessed the situation in a second. Distance to the caravan, 180 meters. Position on the hill. The wind was at their backs. Conditions were ideal. He gave the order, 3 shooters to their positions. The rest provide cover. Emily counted. 30 seconds to deploy. The 3 shooters took up positions on the ridge. Hyun-jun in the center, Jong-woo on the left, Suwa on the right. Haiwan greeted them with rain and the smell of burning. The city stood at the foot of the mountain range. 10-meter-high stone walls, towers at the corners. Behind the walls, houses with tiled roofs were crammed together. Half the roofs were new, recently restored. The rest bore traces of fire and claws. Captain Ryu was waiting for them at the gate. He looked thinner than when the first meeting. Thinner. The scar on his face seemed deeper. He led them to the barracks. He showed them the garrison. 120 men. There had been 240. Half had perished over the past year. Swordsmen, spearmen, 3 mages, 2 of whom could no longer cast spells. Magic core burnout, irreversible. They sat in a corner of the barracks, staring at the wall. Hyun-jun had seen eyes like that before. On Earth, in soldiers after long battles, empty, shut down, people who no longer believed that tomorrow would come. Captain Ryu showed him a map. 3 rifts within a 50-kilometer radius of the city, 2 stable, 1 expanding. Every 2 to 3 weeks, a wave of creatures emerged from the expanding rift, 20 to 50 individuals. Mostly D-class, C-class pack leaders, once every 3 months, B-class, twice a year, Class A. Once, a Titan emerged. They stopped it at the cost of 30 lives. Hyun-jun looked at the map and did the math. 3 fault lines. 50 kilometers. His snipers have a range of 200 meters. 200 meters is nothing on a 50-kilometer scale. He needed positions, prepared in advance, with measured distances, with wind flags, with firing sectors. He didn't need just 1 shooter on a hill. He needed a network. He spent 3 days on reconnaissance. Dahi led the way. Hyun-jun followed her. They surveyed all 3 fault lines. He chose the positions. 12 points on the high ground surrounding each fault line, hills, cliffs, the roofs of abandoned farms. Each point overlooking the approaches from the fault line to the city, each one between 100 and 250 meters from the creature's probable route. At each position, he stuck rods with strips of cloth into the ground, wind vanes. He drove stakes into the ground at measured distances, 100 meters, 150, 200 landmarks. A scout arrives at a position and already knows the distance to every rock and every tree in the sector. No need to count, no need to guess. Everything is measured in advance. On Earth, this was called a range map. Here, it was a revelation. Captain Ryu followed behind him and watched. On the 3rd day, he said that in 20 years of service, he had never seen anyone prepare for battle like this. Hyun-jun replied that a battle is won before it even begins. Everything that followed was simply execution. He began training the garrison, 30 volunteers out of 120. The rest watched skeptically. The swordsmen didn't believe in bows. They were used to killing with swords. To them, a bow was a toy, a cowardly weapon for those afraid to get close. Hyun-jun didn't argue. He took the volunteers and got to work. The same program as at the academy: running, physical training, stance, anchor point, exhale, shoot, 2 weeks of basic training, then archery practice. At the same time, Hana was crafting bows. She worked in the garrison's smithy. The local blacksmith helped her, at first with skepticism, then with interest, then with delight. When Hana showed him the finished composite bow and he fired it for the first time, the blacksmith sat down on the floor and said it was witchcraft. Hana said it was physics. The blacksmith asked what physics was. Hana smiled and said it was a kind of witchcraft. A month later in Haewon, 30 garrison soldiers were shooting with composite bows at 100 meters, not as accurately as Hyun-jun's squad, but accurately enough to hit a beast the size of a horse. And a beast the size of a horse is most of what crawls out of the rifts, and then the wave came. At night, without warning, the rift in the north spewed out 40 beasts at once: D-class, C-class, and one B-class, an armored lizard with 6 legs and a tail studded with bone spikes. The alarm bell rang at 3 in the morning. Hyun-jun was on his feet in 10 seconds, the squad in 30, So-yeon in 15. She had been sleeping in her armor. They took up their positions in 20 minutes. 12 shooters at stations around the northeast approach, prepared positions, distances measured, wind vanes in place, Emily at the central position, Do-hee up front, So-yeon at the foot of the hill with her sword, Yuna in the center, 30 garrison soldiers on the city walls with compound bows. Captain Ryu stood next to Hyun-jun at the main position. He wanted to see everything with his own eyes. The creatures appeared 40 minutes later, small ones at first, Class D, dogs with bony crests. 10, 20, 30, they were running along the road toward the city. Hyun-jun waited. He didn't shoot at the small ones. The small ones were for the garrison. He was looking for Class B. Emily was counting. She called out the distances and adjustments for each archer at their positions. Her voice was steady. No tremor. 4 months ago, she had been crunching numbers in a windowless basement. Now she was directing the fire of 12 archers in a night battle. Hyun-jun gave the order. A first volley at the small ones. 12 arrows, 9 hits, 9 creatures fell. Second volley, 8 hits. Soldiers on the walls opened fire. Arrows flew from both sides. The beasts fell by the dozens. They didn't understand where death was coming from. They were used to swords, to close combat, to people standing right in front of them. But here, death came from above, silently, from 200 meters away. Arrows from the darkness. The small ones were wiped out in 6 minutes. 30 D-class creatures, 0 casualties. But the smaller ones were scouts. Behind them came the C-class creatures, 5 of them, larger, faster, better armored. Hyun-jun's arrows pierced them but didn't kill with a single shot. It took 2, 3, 4 for each one. Emily directed the fire, 2 archers per target, coordinated fire, 2 arrows at a single point, 1 second apart. The first pierced the outer layer. The second entered the wound. The C-class creatures fell. 1, 2, 3, 4. The 5th broke through. Fast, it charged toward the city wall. So-yeon stepped out to meet it. 1 strike. Her SS-rank sword sliced the creature from shoulder to tail. The 2 halves scattered across the ground. So-yeon stood in the darkness, her sword dripping with black blood. Behind her was the wall. Behind the wall were people. She was protecting them, not for the glory of her clan, for specific people, for Min-ho on the wall, for Emily on the hill, for Yuna, who was already running toward the wounded soldier on the eastern flank. Then came the B-class. An armored lizard. It moved slowly, heavily. The ground shook beneath its 6 legs. The bony spikes on its tail scraped against the rocks. Hyun-jun activated the brand, a red dot, under the lower jaw. the soft throat between the armor plates, 5 centimeters, at a distance of 230 meters, in the darkness. He took aim. The wind, 2 meters per second. Adjustment. Emily whispered the numbers. Exhale. Between 2 heartbeats. Window. Shot. The arrow vanished into the darkness. 2 seconds. 3, 4. Impact. The arrow had entered beneath the lizard's lower jaw, deep. The beast wheezed. It stopped. It staggered. And it collapsed. 230 meters. In the dark. 1 arrow. Captain Ryu stood nearby and watched in silence. Then he sat down, right on the ground. He sat there, looking at the dead lizard and the boy with the bow. Then he said one sentence. He said that Hyunjun needed to go to the capital, because the Council of Kings had to know about this. He didn't go to the capital, not right away, because 3 days after the night battle in Haewon, Professor Yoon Dae-soo arrived. He arrived alone, unescorted, riding an old horse, with a travel bag and a warm smile. He said the principal had sent him to check on the unit. He brought letters and supplies. He hugged every student. He called each one by name. They were overjoyed. Min-ho beamed. Soo-ah rushed to hug the old man. Emily started chattering about wind adjustments and night shooting. Yuna offered tea. Hana nodded from the workshop. So-yeon bowed politely. Dahi grunted a greeting, but softened as well. They loved him. Professor Yoon was the only instructor at the academy who, in 3 years, had never once called them trash, who stood up for them before the council, who slipped them food in the cafeteria when the seniors took their portions. A kind old man. Hyunjun stood off to the side and watched. His brand was tingling, more intensely than usual. In Yoon's presence, the tingling turned into a burning sensation, as if the seal were reacting to its creator. That night, Hyunjun didn't sleep. He lay on the roof of the barracks and thought. The facts. Professor Yoon Dae-soo, master of the ancient seals, the only one at the academy who could cast a seal, concealing an SS rank. He had protected Lee Hyunjun from expulsion, not out of kindness, out of necessity. The seal must be maintained, checked. If the mark's bearer leaves the academy, the seal goes out of control. The shadow on the tower that night. Someone was standing in the doorway when the boy stepped off the edge. Who let him fall, or pushed him? Because the boy had learned of his expulsion. If he were expelled, he would leave the academy. The seal would slip out of control. The mark would begin to awaken. The gaze of truth. SS rank. The ability to see the weak point of any system, any organization, any ritual, any seal, any rift. For someone who expands rifts, this is a deadly threat. The Open Doors cult, an organization that deliberately expands rifts, a recruiter within the academies, a man who needs the rifts to grow. Why? Hyunjun didn't know, not yet, but he knew one thing. Yoon Dae-soo hadn't come to inspect the squad. He'd come to inspect the seal, because the seal was weakening, and he could sense it. The next day, Hyunjun did something he'd never done before. He lied. He told the squad he was going on a reconnaissance mission to the distant rift, alone. He needed to check out new positions. He'd be back in 2 days. He said this in front of Yoon, on purpose. Then he left the city, but not toward the rift. He bypassed Haewon from the south and lay in wait on a hill 300 meters from the south gate, a makeshift camouflage of branches and dry grass. The same technique he'd used at the quarry. He waited. 12 hours, 16, 20. On the second night, Yoon Dae-soo walked out of the south gate, alone, without a torch. He walked quickly, suspiciously fast for an old man. His body moved with an agility that didn't match his age. Hyunjun watched him through a homemade spyglass. Yoon was heading south, into the forest. An hour later, he stopped in a clearing and began to wait. 20 minutes later, 2 figures emerged into the clearing, figures in dark cloaks, their faces hidden by masks. One mask was white, the other was red. Yoon spoke to them. Hyunjun was too far away to hear the words, 300 meters, but he could see their gestures. Yoon pointed north, toward Haewon. The figure in the white mask nodded. The figure in the red mask pulled something out from under his cloak. It glinted gold coins. Yoon took them. He hid them in his bag. Then he pulled a scroll from his bosom. He handed it to the white mask. The white mask unrolled the scroll. She looked at it, nodded, put it away. The figures left. Yoon stood alone in the clearing. Then he turned and walked back. Hyun-jun lay in the grass, not breathing. Gold with a non-existent mint mark. 3 contracts for his assassination, 1 from an anonymous client. Coins that don't exist in any kingdom. Information about what? About the unit, about their positions, about the meadows, about him. Yoon sold it. Sold everything he knew. To the cult. To mercenaries. To anyone who paid. A kind old man with a warm smile was trading the lives of the children who adored him. Hyun-jun lay in the grass and felt something burning inside him. Not anger, colder than that, determination. He knew what to do, but first he had to solve another problem, the mark. As long as it was on him, the brand worked at half strength, the gaze of weakness instead of the gaze of truth. 300 meters instead of unlimited range. Living beings instead of any systems. He needed to remove the seal, and the only person who knew how to remove it was the one who had placed it. In the morning, he returned to Haewon. He said the reconnaissance mission had been a success. New positions were marked. Yoon smiled. Hyun-jun smiled back. 2 people who knew the truth about each other, but only one of them knew that the other knew as well. That evening, Hyun-jun gathered the 4 of them, Da-hee, So-yeon, Yoon, and Emily. He told them everything, the facts, the evidence, the logic, the seal. The tower, the shadow, the meeting in the clearing, the gold, the scroll. The 4 faces before him shifted. Yoon turned pale. Emily stopped counting something in her head and froze for the first time ever. So-yeon gripped the hilt of her sword so tightly that the leather on her glove cracked. Da-hee didn't move a muscle. Only her eyes turned black and empty, the eyes of someone accustomed to betrayal. Hyun-jun said he wouldn't tell the others, not yet. Minho wouldn't be able to handle it. He loves Professor Yoon like a father. It would break him. They needed time. And a plan. So-yeon asked what the plan was. Hyun-jun said he would make Yoon remove the seal, voluntarily. Yoon asked how. Hyun-jun said he would show him what he feared most, the truth. Hyun-jun gave Professor Yoon 3 days, 3 days of normal life, training, archery practice, tea by the campfire. Yoon walked among his students and smiled. He told stories about ancient seals. He helped Emily with her calculations. He praised Minho. He ruffled Sua's hair. No one, except the 4 who were in on the secret, saw anything other than a kind old man. Hyun-jun watched and waited. On the 4th day, he went to see Yoon. In the morning, while the garrison was still asleep, the professor was sitting in the guest room drinking tea. Hyun-jun sat down across from him. They were silent for a minute. Then Hyun-jun said he knew about the seal on his mark. Yoon didn't flinch. The cup in his hand didn't waver. He asked which seal Hyun-jun was referring to. Hyun-jun said it was the one Yoon had imprinted 16 years ago on a newborn child bearing the SS rank Gaze of Truth mark. Yoon set down his cup, slowly, carefully. His expression didn't change. The smile remained, but his eyes had changed. They were cold, calculating, the eyes of a man who had lived his entire life behind a mask and suddenly discovered that the mask was being seen. He asked how Hyun-jun knew. Hyun-jun didn't answer the question. Instead, he said he had seen the meeting in the clearing. Gold, a scroll, 2 masks, the cult of the open doors. Yoon was silent for 10 seconds. Then he said that Hyun-jun didn't understand. That the doors must be opened, that the rifts aren't a curse, they're a path, that on the other side there's something greater than this world. That the rank system is a cage that prevents people from seeing the truth. Hyun-jun listened. He'd heard similar rhetoric on Earth from people who believed that chaos would liberate the world, from terrorists, from fanatics, from those willing to kill thousands for an idea that exists only in their heads. He asked one thing. He asked who had been standing on the tower that night when Lee Hyun-jun stepped off the edge. Yoon fell silent for a long time. Then he said it was him. He hadn't pushed the boy. He'd come to check the seal. The boy saw him, got scared, backed away, lost his footing, fell. Yoon said he hadn't planned it, that it was an accident, that the boy had wanted to jump anyway. Hyun-jun looked at him, at the old man who had just called the child's death an accident, at the man who, for 16 years, had kept the boy caged in a web of false rank and polite control, who smiled at him in the dining hall and checked the seal on his shoulder while the boy slept, who had let him die when the boy was no longer useful. Hyun-jun stood up. He said that Yoon had a choice. Option 1, remove the seal voluntarily right now and leave far away forever. Hyun-jun won't tell the squad the truth. The children will preserve the memory of the kind professor, a painful but intact memory. Option 2, Hyun-jun would tell everything, the evidence, the meeting in the clearing, the gold, the scroll, the tower. And then Yoon wouldn't just lose his freedom. He would lose the love of 20 children who considered him a second father. Forever. Yoon looked at him. For a long time. His face changed. The mask melted away. Beneath it was not a villain, not a monster, a weary man who had made a choice too long ago and could no longer turn back. He asked why Hyun-jun wanted the gaze of truth. Hyun-jun said he wanted to see the weak points of the fissures, to find a way to seal them, or at least to understand why they were growing. Yoon laughed, quietly, bitterly. He said that Hyun-jun didn't understand, that the rifts weren't a mistake. They were the world's response to what people were doing, the ranking system, the awakened, the branded. All of it was feeding off the world's energy. It drains it. The rifts are wounds. The world is bleeding to death because people are drinking its power. There's only one way to seal the rifts. Destroy the ranking system, take the marks away from people, return the energy to the world, but no one will give up their mark voluntarily. That's why the cult decided to open the doors wider, so that the rifts would become a threat severe enough to force the world to change, or destroy it. Hyun-jun listened. Then he said there was a third way. Not to destroy the system, to change it, to make the marks consume less energy, to teach people to use their power differently, not as a weapon, as a tool. Yoon shook his head. He said that was naive, that he'd tried it 30 years ago. When he was young and believed in people, the world hadn't changed. People hadn't changed. The strong oppress the weak. The rank system breaks children. Nothing had changed in 30 years. Hyun-jun leaned toward him, looked him in the eyes, and said that things had changed. 20 trash ranks wiped out a pack of beasts in 4 minutes. 30 soldiers with bows, which didn't even exist before, repelled a nighttime attack without a single casualty. The girl who used to count other people's money now calculates aiming adjustments for snipers. The boy who used to tee with his hands now warms bowstrings in battle. The girl who used to embroider now crafts weapons that change the rules of war. The world has already changed. Right here. Right now. In this squad. Yoon sat motionless. His eyes were wet. He was silent for a long time. A very long time. Then he raised his hand. He placed it on Hyun-jun's left shoulder, on the brand. His fingers glowed with a dim gray light. Hyun-jun felt pain. Sharp, deep, as if a nail driven into his shoulder 16 years ago were being pulled out from within. The light pulsed. 10 seconds, 20, 30. The pain intensified. Hyun-jun clenched his teeth. He didn't scream. The light went out. Yoon withdrew his hand. He looked 10 years older than he had a minute ago, pale, with trembling fingers. The seal drained his strength just as much when removed as when applied. Hyun-jun looked at his shoulder. The brand had changed. The design of the eye had become more intricate. The lines were thinner, deeper, and the light was different. Not the dim, flickering glow of an F rank, a bright, even radiance, golden. SS. He activated the brand, and the world changed. He saw everything, not just the red dots on living beings. He saw the stress lines in the barracks walls, cracks in the foundation that would become critical in a year. He saw the weak spot in the lock on the door, that latch that would break with a single blow. He saw the structure of the magical seal on the city walls of Havon and the single point within it that held the entire structure together. Remove that point, and the wall would collapse. And far to the north, beyond the mountains, he saw a fault line, not as a glow on the horizon, but as a system, a web of energy lines extending into the ground. And within that web was a point, red, bright, a weak spot in the fault line, the place where it could be sealed. Yun stood up, gathered his things, and walked toward the door. He stopped at the threshold. He didn't turn around. He said that the former director of the academy, Kanam, was the one standing above the cult. He was preparing something in Haewon, something big, soon. Then he left. Yun-jun stood alone in the room, with a new mark, with new vision, and with the knowledge that in a few days something this world had never seen before would descend upon Haewon. The attack came 4 days later. Not a wave of beasts, an army, 3 rifts around Haewon opened simultaneously. Hundreds of beasts poured out of them, D-class, C-class, B-class, and 3 titans. Creatures as tall as a bell tower, stone-like skin, eyes like lanterns in the fog. Every step shook the ground for a kilometer. Behind the titans came people, cultists of the open doors, in dark cloaks and masks, 50, maybe more. They were guiding the creatures, with magical wands, with lines of power, like shepherds herding a flock. In the center walked a man without a mask, short, gray-haired, in a black robe with gold embroidery, the former director of the Kanam Academy. His brand burned on both shoulders, 2 brands. Hyun-jun had never seen anything like this before. A double brand, one controlled the rifts, the other controlled the beasts. Hyun-jun stood atop the spire of the cathedral in the center of Haewon, the highest point in the city. He could see everything. The gaze of truth was operating at full power. Red dots glowed everywhere, on every beast, on every cultist, on every titan, and on every rift. 3 red stars on the horizon, 3 faint dots, 3 places where the rifts could be sealed. But first, he had to survive. He began to issue orders. The radios were still out of commission. Instead, the system he'd built over the past 3 months was in operation. Signal flags on the towers, bird calls, messengers running between positions, and the voice of Emily, who sat in the bell tower 200 meters away from him and calculated the aiming adjustments for all 100 of the city's shooters. 100. 15 from his squad, 30 trained garrison soldiers, and 55 militiamen they'd drilled over the past week. The militiamen were poor shots, 30% accuracy at 80 meters, but there were many of them, and they were standing on the walls, and they were firing. The first wave of small creatures surged against the walls. Arrows rained down, from top to bottom. Out of 100 archers targeting D-class creatures, 70 were firing, 30 arrows per volley, 20 hits, second volley, third. The small beasts were falling by the dozens. They didn't even reach the walls. The arrows killed them at a distance of between 150 meters. Not a single swordsman drew his blade. Not a single mage expended any energy. The small ones were wiped out by arrows. The C-class creatures arrived next, 20 of them, larger, better armored. Hyun-jun's squad was tasked with dealing with them. 15 archers in prepared positions. Emily kept count. Da-hee darted between the positions, relaying commands. Hana stood in the workshop, restringing the bowstrings on the spare bows. Yuna ran along the walls with bandages. Soyeon stood at the gate with her sword drawn. Coordinated fire. 2 archers per target. 4 arrows at a single point. The S-class creatures were falling, one after another, but they were fast. 3 broke through to the walls. Soyeon killed 2. The garrison soldiers speared the 3rd as he tried to climb over the wall. 1 soldier was wounded. Yuna reached him in 40 seconds. She healed him. Then the Titans arrived, 3 of them, all at once. The ground shook. Stones rained down from the walls. Hyunjun watched them from above, 3 mountains of stone and fury. Each Titan was a system, not just an animal, a magical construct of flesh and energy. The gaze of truth revealed their internal structure, energy channels running through their bodies like veins, and at the center of each channel was a node, the point where all the lines converged, a red dot the size of a coin. On the first Titan, the dot was at the back of its head, beneath the stone crust, 30 meters above the ground. On the second, it was in the center of the chest. On the third, at the base of the throat. Hyunjun took aim at the first one, a distance of 400 meters, a new bow. Hana had made it specially, double reinforcement, a triple layer of tendons. The draw was so strong that even Hyunjun's current arms trembled when fully drawn. 400 meters. That was beyond the limits of any bow in this world, but Hana's compound bow was out of this world. Wind speed, 4 meters per second, adjustment. Emily was shouting the numbers from the bell tower. Angle, trajectory, flight time, 7 seconds. Exhale, the window between heartbeats. The shot, the arrow flew. 7 seconds, it flew in an arc. It rose, it hovered at the apex of its trajectory, it began to fall, and it struck the Titan's nape, right on the red dot, right at the energy node. The Titan stopped, froze. A crack ran across its body, from the nape to the shoulders, from the shoulders to the chest. The cracks widened, the stone skin split open. Energy leaked from the destroyed node like water from a punctured barrel. The Titan collapsed. 30 meters of stone and flesh crashed to the ground 200 meters from the walls. The earth shook. A wall of dust rose. 400 meters, 1 arrow, 1 Titan. The second Titan, a spot on its chest. 450 meters, further away. The wind picked up. 6 meters per second. Hyunjun knew he wouldn't hit it. Not at this distance. Not in the chest. Too far, too windy. He needed a shooter closer. He looked at the positions. Jongwoo was on the north tower. 200 meters to the second Titan, a realistic range. Hyunjun shouted to Emily. She heard him. She calculated. She shouted the adjustment to Jongwoo. With a flag, Jongwoo saw it. He took aim. His hands didn't shake. A month ago, they had. Not now. 4 months of training. Thousands of shots, calluses as hard as stone, eyes like lenses, fire. Jongwoo's arrow traveled 200 meters and pierced the Titan's chest, not right in the bullseye. Close, 10 centimeters to the left. The Titan staggered but didn't fall. Jongwoo fired again. Closer, 5 centimeters, still not the mark. Third shot, a hit. The arrow pierced the power node. The Titan cracked and collapsed. 3 arrows, not just 1, but it collapsed. Jongwoo stood on the tower, breathing heavily. The boy who, 6 months ago, had been on the list for expulsion had just killed a Titan, the third Titan, the largest one. It was heading straight for the gates, a weak spot on its throat, 300 meters from the gates, but the throat was protected. The Titan kept its head down as it walked. Stone plates covered its neck. The weak spot was exposed only when the Titan raised its head. For a second, between steps, 1 step, head down, plates closed, 2nd step, head up, plates part, half a second, window of opportunity. Hyunjun could have shot himself. 300 meters, he would have hit it, but he looked down. Emily was standing in the square in front of the cathedral. She was counting. Her lips were moving. Numbers, distance, wind, angle, the interval between the Titan's steps, the duration of the window. She knew everything. A spare bow stood next to her, a compound bow, a Hana, calibrated. Emily was the worst shot in the squad. She was a spotter, not a marksman, but she knew where to shoot better than anyone. Hyunjun shouted her name. She looked up. He shouted one word. Shoot! Emily froze. She looked at the Titan. She looked at the bow. She looked at Hyunjun on the spire. He was looking down at her, calmly, confidently, like a teacher who knows the student is ready, even if the student doesn't know it yet. Emily raised her bow. Her hands were shaking. She pressed the string against the corner of her jaw, the anchor point she'd found 4 months ago. The Titan took a step, head down. The Titan took another step, head up. The plates parted. Half a second, Emily fired. She didn't calculate the adjustment. She was the adjustment. The arrow traveled 150 meters. It entered the Titan's throat. Right on the bullseye. Precise. Perfect. Like a formula with only one correct answer. The Titan stopped. A crack ran from its throat down its chest, down its legs, down its tail. It split apart, like a rock struck in the one and only right spot. 30 meters of rock and energy scattered 200 meters from the gate. Emily stood with her bow in her lowered hands. She stared at her hands, as if they belonged to someone else, as if she couldn't believe that these fingers had just done what they'd done. The youngest, 15 years old, an accountant, a calculator, a useful resource. She had just killed a Titan. 3 Titans destroyed. The walls of Havon still stood. Not a single swordsman had drawn a blade. Not a single mage had burned through a magic core. Arrows, just arrows. From a distance. But the battle wasn't over. The former director of the Sanam Academy stood behind the line of fallen beasts. 50 cultists surrounded him. His double brand burned. He raised his hands, and 3 fissures began to widen. Right now, energy gushed from the fissures like water from a burst dam. New creatures were pouring out of the widened fissures. Dozens, hundreds, an endless stream. There wouldn't be enough arrows. There wouldn't be enough people. Yunjun looked at the fissures through the gaze of truth. 3 red dots, 3 weak spots, 3 places where the fissures could be sealed. He couldn't reach them, too far, kilometers, but he didn't need to get there. Because the gaze of truth saw more than just the dots. It saw connections, lines of energy linking all 3 rifts, and these lines converged at a single point, in a man, the former director. His double mark was the node, the center of the web. The energy of all 3 rifts flowed through him. He was the key, and at the same time, the weak point of the entire system. The red mark glowed on his chest, not on his body, on the mark, on the left mark, the one that controlled the faults. If this mark were destroyed, control would vanish, the faults would lose their guiding force, and they would close. Not forever, but for a time, long enough to rebuild the world. Yunjun took aim. The distance was 500 meters, beyond the range of any bow, even a composite one, even Hani's masterpiece. The arrow wouldn't reach it. Or it would reach it, but without energy. It would get stuck and fail to penetrate. He needed something else. He looked at the arrow in his hands, then at the mark on his shoulder. The gaze of truth revealed the weak point of any system. Any system, including the system called distance. Yunjun concentrated, deeper than ever before. The gaze of truth unfolded at full power. He saw the air, currents, layers, temperature boundaries, places where the air was denser, places where it was thinner, corridors between the layers through which the arrow would fly with minimal resistance. He saw the trajectory, not a straight line, a curved one, through 3 air corridors. 2 turns, the arrow was supposed to fly not toward the target, but toward the first corridor. Then, the wind in the corridor would guide it to the second, then to the third, and the third would lead it precisely to the red dot. 500 meters, 3 corridors, 2 turns, an impossible shot for any human in any world. But Yunjun was no person. He was a sniper with 30 years of experience in a body that had done nothing but shoot for the past 4 months, with the mark showing him the way, literally, a breath, between 2 heartbeats, a window. The arrow flew. It flew for 9 seconds. It rose, entered the first air corridor, veered left, caught the second corridor, descended. The third corridor brought it out onto a straight path. The arrow struck the former director's left mark, right in the red dot, into the node that held the 3 fractures. The former director looked down at the arrow sticking out of his shoulder, at the mark that was fading, at the energy lines snapping one after another. He raised his head. He looked at the cathedral spire, at the boy with the bow 500 meters away from him, and his face showed no anger, only surprise. The 3 rifts began to close, slowly, with a grinding sound, like doors that had been opened too long. The creatures crawling out of them froze. They lost their bearings. Without the mark's controlling power, they were simply animals, angry, frightened animals. Archers on the walls continued to fire. So Yan was hacking away at the gate. Dahi slashed through the alleys. Yuna ran among the wounded. Hana reloaded spare bows. The battle raged on for another 2 hours, but the outcome was decided the moment an arrow struck the brand. The cultists fled when they saw their leader fall. 50 masked figures vanished into the forest. Jessica Reed took out 3 from a nearby hill. She had appeared in Haywen 2 days ago, silently, without explanation. She took up a position in the distance with a bow that Hana had made to fit her palm, and she shot, precise, cold-blooded, from a kilometer away. Hyun-jun didn't ask where she was from. He didn't ask why she had come. He simply nodded at her when he saw her. She nodded back. That was enough. By dawn, the battle was over. Haven stood. The walls stood. The people stood. Casualties, 12 wounded. 2 seriously injured, not a single fatality, not one. For the first time in Haewon's history, the wave had been repelled without a single death. Hyun-jun was climbing down from the spire. Slowly, every muscle ached. His hands were shaking, his eyes were watering from the strain. The gaze of truth at full power was burning through his energy like a wood-burning stove. He was empty, drained, worn out. His squad stood in the square in front of the cathedral, all of them dirty, sweaty, exhausted, alive. Min Ho, his fingers scorched by the bowstrings, Sua with a twig in her hair, Jong Woo, his shoulder bandaged, Emily still clutching her bow, Dahi with a blood-stained knife, Yuna with an empty bag from which she'd taken every last bandage, Hana with hands blackened by tar and oil, So-yeon with a sword in its sheath and her first genuine smile on her face, Jessica on a hill outside the city, far away, alone, just the way she liked it. Hyun-jun stopped in front of them, tired, dirty, alive. He looked at them and thought that in his first life he'd had nothing like this, no family, no friends, no people worth standing up for. He'd been a loner, a sniper on a long-range post, a man who had spent his whole life looking through a scope and seeing only targets, and now he looked at 20 faces and saw people. He knew each one by name. He taught each one in his own way. He gave each one exactly what they needed, not general advice, not a general doctrine, a specific helping hand extended to a specific person. That was his way of showing love, which he had finally come to realize. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, said 2 words, "We did it." Then he corrected himself, 3 words, "We did it." Then he added 2 more. "All together." Emily rushed to him first. She wrapped her arms around him. Min Ho followed, Sua Jong-woo. Yuna approached calmly and placed her hand on his shoulder, on his left shoulder, on the brand. Her touch was warm, not judgmental, caring. Hana stood slightly to the side, smoking a pipe, but her eyes were shining. So-yeon was the last to approach. She stood in front of him, looked him in the eyes, and for the first time ever, she hugged him, briefly, tightly. Then she stepped back and turned away, but he managed to notice that she was smiling. Dahi stood to the side with her arms crossed. He looked at her. She looked at him. Then she rolled her eyes. She walked over. She jabbed her fist into his shoulder, his right one, not the brand. She grumbled that he looked terrible and that he needed to get some sleep. Then she turned away, but he could see that she was smiling too. The sun was rising over Haven. Golden light flooded the city. The walls still stood, the roofs were intact. People were coming out into the streets and looking up at the sky. The rifts on the horizon were fading. Slowly, but they were fading. The 3 wounds in the sky were closing, not forever. Hyun-jun knew nothing lasts forever. The rifts would return if the world didn't change, if the rank system remained the same, if the strong continued to oppress the weak, if children were broken before they had a chance to understand themselves. But he also knew that the world had already begun to change. The 20 trash-rank youths he'd plucked from the mud stood before him, smiling. Each had found their place. Each had become who they were meant to be. Not a swordsman, not a mage, not who they'd been forced to be. Themselves. There was a lot of work ahead. The small wedge doctrine, educational reform, new academies, the Council of Kings, sealing the remaining rifts, years of work. But today, right now, in the sun-drenched square of a city both destroyed and standing strong, a 34-year-old man stood in the body of a 16-year-old boy, surrounded by teenagers whom the world had cast aside, whom he had lifted up, who had lifted themselves up, and he was drinking tea from a tin mug, bitter, hot, like coffee if you squinted your eyes. He was smiling. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, he had nowhere to rush to. For the first time, he had a home, not a building, not a room, people, and that was enough.